I checked. Yeah.
No, but there is a red hat from the show.
We've had complaints about Dusty.
And what are you doing when she starts
True
barking?
balance.
Well, just, no, I realized that
Leave.
I probably
You go far.
She'll want to go on the water.
She can't move.
Not for another week.
Oh no.
No. She'd love it there.
Yeah.
How are you, Dad?
Alright, I'm ready.
I'm ready too.
Alright, shall we?
Yeah.
You know they save after.
Hi, Dad.
Oh,
What?
Are you ready to leave?
yeah.
Oh, I need a pen. Sorry.
I've got to.
Alice Wood wants bed
Bring it out. What, like now?
by 5.
Just.
Surely, yeah, surely it's in. Well, we could be back.
Dusty.
What?
It's 5.
I just said I'd help Alice Wood with her bed. She needs it done by 5.
I mean, you might have. I don't know, committed this.
Well, she asked me like an hour ago
What?
if I could help her with her bed.
You
She won't be
tell
back by
now.
Well,
5.
it needs to be done by 5.
It's like 40 minutes.
Yeah.
What's
Maybe you guys just go.
Surely,
What are you gonna say?
she'll adapt.
Like,
Can't you do it tonight? Like after 5? After
Yeah,
it's
By
out.
5. Oh, I thought we were water. Okay, no one can make it a big deal that we're leaving. That's it.
I'm going for a walk.
Well, not this one here.
You're a princess, aren't you?
I think it worked.
Actually, kind of looks like you.
It was pretty fresh, so.
Yeah, no.
You're making me crazy, girl.
I reckon we just go.
This other is strong man. Also, why doesn't it be strong man? You know, it could be a strong woman.
Yeah, why wasn't I asked?
Or strong
I'm stronger
non-binary.
than you.
Jenna and Kirsty, thank you. Hundreds of people from all walks of life are being celebrated for their years of devoted service to the wider community in the Australia Day Honours. Among them are 354 women, or 48% of all recipients. That's the most in the history of the awards. One of the highest honours has been bestowed upon Archie Roach, who died last year.
Singer-songwriter Archie Roach has been posthumously awarded Companion of the Order of Australia. It acknowledges his dedication to performing arts, Indigenous rights and reconciliation. Archie Roach is also being celebrated for his support of emerging First Nations artists over a career that spanned 40 years.
We talked about these sorts of things, and I remember him saying, you know, it's actually not about the person that's being awarded, it's about the community. I think he would have been really chuffed.
Actor Claudia Cardinal also acknowledged for her celebrated career, which began in the 1980s with films, before she went on to become a star of the small screen.
We have an incredible talent pool here in Australia. Some people overseas, but then a lot of them come back, and so our industry just gets richer and more knowledgeable.
Philip Noyce has been honoured for his work as a film director, including the groundbreaking rope-proof fence in 2002.
I never thought I'd get paid to make movies, and yet 54 years later, I haven't done anything else.
Prolific novel and writer Robert Mann has been honoured for his service to tertiary education, political and social commentary, and to the Indigenous community.
I had a very controversial life, and so the recognition that I've contributed something to the country I care about deeply matters to me a lot.
Among those recognised for their outstanding work in the Indigenous community is Katrina Fanning from Canberra, who Wiradjuri played for the Australian Royals for 14 years and continues to lead in the fields of education and health.
It does come on Australia Day, so it has some mixed feelings, but for me it's about reflecting on our past and never forgetting where I've come from and the people that came before me, but also looking to the future and what's possible for us.
Denise Smith-Ali from Western Australia is dedicated to documenting her native Noongar language. The linguist says Australia is losing languages at one of the highest rates in the world.
It's been a hard road, but it's been the most beautiful job I've ever had in my life. And enhancing my language and culture.
David Paulson from Sydney has helped in the fight to find a cure for HIV and educating others about the virus. In 1984, he became one of the first people in Australia to learn he was HIV positive, but refused to give up hope.
So I made a decision within probably 30 seconds of diagnosis that I would do anything to help medical science know more about HIV and try and help find a treatment and cure.
Fred Alarm has been celebrated for his work within Victoria's African communities. A member of Melbourne's Nigerian community, he co-founded the city's annual African Music and Cultural Festival.
The African Australians are excelling in all walks of life. They're not being seen as much. And so this modern actually means a lot.
In Queensland, Robert Edwards' work in suicide prevention has been acknowledged. 2 years after the death of her brother in 2008, she founded the organisation Roses in the Ocean.
Back then, the word suicide wasn't talked about, and it was really clear that the people who actually experienced suicide really weren't being heard.
Barbara and David Rubendijk have fostered more than 400 children in their rural home on the outskirts of Cobargo in New South Wales, work they continued even after losing their home in the 2019 bushfires.
I suppose we get a lot of enjoyment out of it. People say, oh, you know, it's so good for the kids. But I think that it's been really, really good for me.
The recipients or family members will receive their awards in ceremonies around the country in coming months. James Wakeman, ABC News.
Achievements and contributions of key role models have been recognised at the Australian of the Year Awards. Writer and film director Taryn Bromford, who struggled to accept her body, was named the Australian of the Year at the ceremony in Canberra. The 45-year-old Adelaide woman has gone on to inspire millions of people worldwide. Her documentaries and best-selling books encourage people to embrace how they look.
I learned to actually embrace my body. It took some time, but I got there. And for me, it felt like winning the golden ticket. And I wanted to share that message with as many people as I could around the world. My dad always taught me, if you know something that can help others, you've got to stand up and you've got to speak and you've got to help. And so I made a film, made a couple of films, wrote some books, and I've been speaking endlessly about body image for the last 10 years. And I'm just so excited that we can take it now from a conversation that sort of has been a little bit hashtag love your body to something a lot more serious. We need to get this right for every Australian, especially our children.
Professor Tom Halmer is the Senior Australian of the Year. His social justice report in 2006 prompted ongoing efforts to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. The 69-year-old Kanarakan elder and University of Canberra Chancellor says much more work still needs to be done.
What we saw and what we've seen in the intervening decade and a bit was 6 prime ministers, multiple ministerial changes and government changes. And all of that is very destabilising for any program activity when you get a minister come in and they decide that they want to change the direction. And so that's why we really strongly advocate for a voice to be enshrined in the Constitution, because that will mean that there will be some stability, that it won't be left to political parties or individual ministers and so forth to make these substantial changes to the policy direction.
Sakaru Ewan Nabil, who fled civil war in Sudan to become one of Australia's top footballers, is the Young Australian of the Year. The 27-year-old has been recognised for his charity work helping to support refugees. Unable to attend last night's ceremony, in a video message, he says he's now motivated to work hard.
Even more important thing is to help the next generation and also inspire them to be themselves and follow their dreams.
And a Sikh from Western Sydney who feeds those in need and champions tolerance has been named this year's Australian Local Hero. Amar Singh founded the charity Turbans for Australia after suffering racial slurs based on how he looks and dresses.
I wanted to turn those bad comments into positive because that's the only way forward. We need to make our society move forward, productive and wonderful nation what it is. We need to highlight the best things of our country. So working through charitable causes, getting this stage where we are today, is certainly a humbling experience, but yet great experience to say we can all make a difference.
The flood-affected community of Lismore in northern New South Wales is slowly recovering after catastrophic flooding a year ago. What's kept many people going has been the grassroots community support, which will be celebrated today after the whole town's postcode was nominated for Citizen of the Year. Robin Herbert reports from Lismore.
11 months ago, the city of Lismore was underwater, but today it's been about celebrating and recognising those people and community groups who really have pitched in and lended a hand in the flood recovery response. So much so that even the postcode of Lismore, everyone who makes up this community was nominated for the Citizen of the Year award. In the end, it was an individual, Sophia Watt, who set up a kitchen that just catered for so many people who required food in the days, weeks and months after the flood. It could be thousands of people. That of people, and I did have people help, we were going up to 1,400 meals a week. So now you can imagine over 11 months, that's so chaos. Attention now turns to the flood anniversary next month and also the ongoing support needed for people to get back into their homes. Across this region, there are still 600 people who are in emergency accommodation. There are hundreds more who are in their homes, but they're in fairly basic and primitive conditions. The Reconstruction Corporation is overseeing the Resilient Homes package. There's still only about 130 people, we understand, who have been given a response in terms of a potential buyback of the like. So it's a slow recovery for the community.
The man charged over the disappearance of his mother on the Gold Coast has been denied bail. 61-year-old Wendy Sleeman disappeared from her Eleanor home on Tuesday afternoon. Her son, 30-year-old Slade Murdoch, is charged with multiple offences, including unlawful stalking, burglary and kidnapping. He's appeared in the Brisbane Magistrates Court in a wheelchair, where he's been denied bail and is due to reappear in court tomorrow. The search for Wendy Sleeman continues. Police are looking for a blue Honda Jazz, which is no else.
Whilst we're hopeful that Wendy is still alive, I must say we are transitioning from a missing person investigation to a suspected homicide, and every minute counts at this particular time. If she is still alive, she needs help now. So if you know something, come to. I can't stress enough that it's about her. It's not about anything else. It's about finding her.
Northern Territory police have arrested one of the country's most wanted fugitives. Mark Ford was arrested on a yacht by the Joint Organised Crime Task Force as the vessel attempted to sail from Cullen Bay Marina in Darwin. Australian Border Force members found the 32-year-old hiding in the hull when they boarded. Mr. Ford has been the subject of a nationwide manhunt since he fled New South Wales in October last year. He'll face an extradition hearing in Darwin on Monday. The Northern Territory's Chief Minister says new alcohol restrictions imposed on Alice Springs won't be extended through the rest of the NT. This week, Natasha Files announced Alice Springs would see immediate new alcohol restrictions, including reduced bottle shop trading hours and purchase limits. Despite crime hitting hard in other towns, she says the restrictions have been tailored just to the Alice Springs community. Ms. Files says there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and any further changes will need to be considered by consultation. Ukrainian forces are set to receive a boost in firepower, with Germany and the United States agreeing to supply them with modern battle tanks. Ukraine has hailed the decision as a turning point that could help deter an expected Russian offensive in the spring.
These soldiers are fighting a 21st century war with Soviet-era tanks. They're struggling to hold back Russia's front in the Donetsk region and are desperate for Western weapons.
We need more equipment, we need more weapons.
Kiev asked its allies for 300 modern battle tanks. The US has vowed to send 31 of these, M1 Abrams, enough for one battalion. But there's concern the vehicles will be difficult for Ukrainians to run.
Abrams tanks are the most capable tanks in the world. They're also extremely complex to operate and maintain. So we're also giving Ukraine the parts and equipment necessary to effectively sustain these tanks on the battlefield.
Alongside American armored vehicles, more support is coming from Germany. After weeks of pressure, Berlin has agreed to send 14 of its Leopard 2 tanks, considered one of the best for warfare in Ukraine.
It gives its crew a degree of survivability that the Russian tanks can't even come close to.
But in Germany, there was reluctance to send offensive weaponry. Some still feeling the weight of history as an aggressor in 2 world wars.
Lufthansa, Lufthansa, trust me, trust the German government. Since we are coordinating efforts on an international level, we will continue to ensure that this support is possible without the risks for our country.
Germany's decision paves the way for other European countries to send their Leopard 2 tanks onto Ukraine. Already, leaders here in the UK have promised to send a squadron of Challenger 2 tanks to be on the ground in the coming months. Kremlin officials have labelled the tank supply as provocation by the West.
There is no offensive threat to Russia.
It will be months before any more tanks are on the battlefront. Until then, Ukrainians will have to use what they have. Isabel Higgins, ABC News.
At least one person has been killed and several more injured in a stabbing attack in a church in southern Spain. Police have arrested a man who they allege was wielding either a machete or a samurai sword when he attacked churchgoers in a parish in Algeciras. According to local media, the parish priest is among the injured and is in a serious condition. An investigation has been launched to determine the motive behind the attack. Supporters of South Africa's main opposition party have marched to the ruling ANC party's headquarters, protesting against an ongoing electricity emergency. The nation is experiencing regular power cuts as the state-owned power utility struggles to provide enough electricity to meet demand. Households and businesses are going without power for hours a day. Motorists have to deal with massive traffic jams, and communities say the cuts are leading to high levels of crime.
We really need government to come to a point where they sit down and discuss and use the relevant people to make the change within the issues that we are facing. Because in all honesty, it affects us so much financially.
An Iranian chess player who defected to Spain after she competed without a hijab has met with the Spanish Prime Minister in Madrid. Sarah Kadem had taken part in a championship held in Kazakhstan in late December without a hijab, resulting in a warning from Iran telling her not to return to her country. The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has tweeted he's learned a lot from a woman who inspires him. He's added he supports all women athletes and her example contributes to a better world. 6 million people are facing famine during Afghanistan's coldest winter in 15 years, according to the United Nations. The country is in the grips of an economic crisis, and government officials say more than 150 people have died as temperatures have dropped as low as minus 34 degrees. Many aid groups have suspended operations in recent weeks due to the Taliban's rule banning female workers.
If you can't help us rescind the ban, give us the exemptions during our winter. I was in one of the Taliban ministries yesterday, specifically talking about the need for nutrition what we call water sanitation and nutrition, where women's work is particularly vital to the success of the operation. So the winter is a worry. It's not the only worry. But I think the next few weeks are absolutely crucial.
The coldest winter in more than a decade is causing deaths and havoc across Asia, cancelling flights and travel plans. Record snowfall and blizzards in parts of Japan have brought traffic and trains to a standstill, with authorities urging people to stay home. The Arctic winds have seen temperatures in North China drop to as low as minus 53 degrees. The cold snap has already killed more than 120 people in Afghanistan, with some regions completely cut off by the snow. Former US President Donald Trump has been cleared to return to Facebook and Instagram. The owner of both platforms, Meta, had banned Mr. Trump for 2 years over incendiary posts about the January 6th riots. Nick Clegg, Meta's president of global affairs, says the accounts will be reinstated in the coming weeks, along with new measures to deter repeated offences. The move comes as Mr. Trump makes another run for the White House in 2024, but he's been warned if he posts violating content, the accounts will be suspended for anywhere between 1 month and 2 years. It's possible that humans can understand gestures used by chimpanzees to communicate with each other. Scientists have asked volunteers to watch videos and then translate the animals' gestures, and the results indicate this form of communication may be the origin of our verbal communication.
Grooming builds bonds of friendship.
Our closest living relatives, social, intelligent primates that communicate without speaking. And it seems that we humans can tune into this silent, gesturing language. Researchers who spent years observing great apes closely in the wild have recorded a whole gesture dictionary, dozens of signals, expressions, and movements that chimps and bonobos use to communicate. By showing videos of these gestures to volunteers, scientists discovered that more than half the time, people are able to understand the message that a wild chimp or bonobo is trying to convey. Here's how a chimpanzee says "groom me, please." And this is a bonobo silently demanding food from a companion. Some gestures are easier for us to understand than others. This display is apparently flirtation. But the fact that we can derive meaning from these gestures suggests that they provided a foundation for our own language.
Our last common ancestors with bonobos and chimpanzees probably used quite similar gestures, and that these gestures may have then gone on to scaffold the evolution of human gesture and human language as we know it now.
Gorillas, orangutans, and other great apes also use some of these same signals. It's something that people who work with these primates tune into every day.
Gesture is so important to great apes. All of the little ways they need to regulate their social interactions in these amazingly complex social worlds they live in. It's the sort of communicative grease that gets all of that working.
These gestures and our ability to interpret them, the researchers say, sends a scientific message about how our own language evolved.
There were a group of boys from outback New South Wales who went on to become trailblazers of Indigenous hip-hop music. A group of boys known as the Canyon Mob. The group drew global attention for the song Down River. 20 years on, it's time to look at the Little Canyon Mob's legacy and the future for other young people in the outback.
The Wilcannia Mob's recognition at the 2003 Dudley Awards was a moment to remember.
First of all, we'd like to thank everyone who supported us and voted for us.
Band manager Brendan Adams came to Wilcannia as part of a community outreach program to give vulnerable people opportunities.
Record in remote communities throughout Australia was very high, and that one of these positive programs for Kenya.
Conroy Johnson is among 2 of the group's 5 original members still living in Wilcannia. Noticed by English rapper MIA, the Wilcannia Mob spread their barking culture across the globe. Hip-hop workshop on Morgan has helped discover the group and says their music has had a lasting impact.
That opened ears and minds
to possibilities of wow, we can take hip hop, we can use hip hop to tell our stories.
Being part of the Wood Canyon Mob was an incredible opportunity for us. The local kids growing up here today might not always be able to realise their potential.
The moment you focus and invest that world with young people, you will build them to be the leaders.
It seems there's more to come for young people in this outback community. Yusuf Saudi, ABC News, Kenya.
Quick look at the national weather now. Brisbane, sunny. Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne and Hobart, partly cloudy. Mostly sunny in Adelaide, sunny in Perth and Darwin, showers and coastal storm. Keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. Tens of thousands have taken part in Invasion Day rallies across the country. In Sydney, crowds began moving through the city after more than a dozen speeches from First Nations elders and community leaders. Elsewhere, marches have been held under this year's theme, Treating with Full Force. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has led some of the country's newest citizens in making their pledge at the national ceremony in Canberra. A traditional smoking ceremony and Indigenous culture display kicked off Australia Day events in Sydney. The image campaigner Taryn Brumfitt has been named the 2023 Australian of the Year. She used her acceptance speech to urge adults to be better body image role models for Australian children. University Chancellor and Canarakan elder Tom Calnup is the senior Australian. And US President Joe Biden will send 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine following Germany's commitment to send 14 Leopard 2 tanks. But it could take months for the vehicles to reach the reserve. The White House says the $400 million defense support package will help bolster Ukraine's spring offensive. Survival Day ceremonies are being held in Indigenous communities in the far north, including at Yarrabah, Queensland's largest discrete Indigenous community. Holly Richardson.
The day began here in Yarrabah with a march as well as speeches and smoking ceremonies and dancing by the community. It's an annual event here and it's very significant to the community. Of course, it's always a day of mixed emotions. There's a great deal of sadness and trauma that's brought up each year from the many generations of trauma that this community has had to endure since they were displaced here and the years that they've had to live under colonial rule. But there's also a sense of pride of how much the community has survived and the strength it has come through to today with. One of the things that's definitely different about this year, though, is the strength of discussion around the voice of Parliament and also what's going to be happening in the future with the death of the Queen and what a new sovereign leader will mean for Australia and Indigenous peoples.
Hundreds of Australians from all walks of life have been celebrated today for their years of devoted service to the wider community. One of those is Sydney man David Paulson, who was diagnosed with HIV almost 40 years ago. At the time, it was considered a death sentence. Against a backdrop of fear and homophobia, he offered his body to the medical world to help find a treatment. That effort and his continued advocacy against HIV stigma has earned him recognition as a member of the Order of Australia. This is his story.
My name's David Paulson. I was one of the first 400 people in Australia to be diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. Doctors in the early 1983 started taking blood from gay men around Sydney. They tested 1,000 people, or 382 people tested positive to the HIV virus. Today, there are less than 28 people still alive from that 400. When I was first diagnosed, I was overcome with feelings of disbelief, horror, suffocating terror, and guilt and shame. And this little voice said to me, "No, you are not going to die." I remember banging my hand down on my doctor's desk and saying, "I want to help." So I made a decision within probably 30 seconds of diagnosis that I would do anything to help medical science. I undertook 28 HIV drug trials. The side effects were just ghastly. it felt like I was on chemotherapy for 20 years. So that was the big contribution towards finding the treatment that we have today, and leading on to the wonderful PrEP, which is the drug that stops people contracting HIV.
Yes.
My advocacy work involves talking to everyone I possibly can. I've talked to school children, university students, to ensure that people understand the stigma and discrimination is worse than the disease. To be recognised as a member of the Order of Australia is a tremendous honour. Yes, I have done some important work with HIV and HIV advocacy, but it was also my duty to do this. So I really am so honoured to be have been selected for doing something that I felt was my duty.
Recipient of the Order of Australia, David Pearson. From Western Australia, Pakuwuru Professor Helen Milroy has been awarded a member of the Order of Australia for her service to public health and the Indigenous community through her decades-long work as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, researcher and children's author.
I think whenever your work is recognised, it means that it's been important, which I'm really glad of that, because I do think that the sort of well-being of our children is one of the most important things that we can do in life. And so I think it creates an interest in the topic as well. And so that's what I'm really hoping, is that this creates a renewed sort of interest and opportunity to invest more in the social emotional well-being of our children. If you look at some of our kids, particularly our First Nations children in particular, some of them aren't doing very well. And we have a wonderful country, we have great resources. There's no reason why all children shouldn't have the same opportunities. Women work with children in particular, and you see a child get their spark, that's the best reward you could get. Like my grandmother's country is in the Pilbara region, which is around Margaret. Having come from that Aboriginal background, there was always the fear of children being taken, and a concern about children's development, and then you see the disadvantage that children and parents go through. I think, have had a natural interest in kids and in sort of mental health side of things. Always loved hearing people's stories. And that's what's driven me all the way through. I was a general practitioner for a while, and I found that a lot of the work I was doing was mental health work about children and families. So I thought, well, why not actually get the specialisation, and particularly the interest is in the area of trauma and look at what that has. And so that's led me to various different ways of working over the years, which I thought really good.
He's one of Australia's most recognisable stars of the stage and screen, playing a leading role in everything from quintessential Australian films to Hollywood blockbusters. But today, David Wenham has been honoured for his contribution to the arts. We sat down with Kirsten Aiken and spoke about the thrill of being recognised alongside ordinary Australians who've done extraordinary things.
Congratulations to you. What does this honour mean to you?
I'm going to say initially I was rather surprised. I received an email in my inbox. Luckily I didn't delete it because it was a curious email that looked as though it should have been in the spam box. So when I opened it up and read the email, my initial reaction was I was surprised. And then reading it again, I've got to say I was quietly chuffed.
How does the creative community tell the story of Australia? And do you believe it does it well?
I think it's impossible to do it on a macro scale, so you have to do it little bit by little bit. You know, a lot of those little small piecemeal chunks would paint a lovely tapestry of what Australia is and who we are as Australians. Something like 23-24% of our population are born overseas. So a quarter of our population, you know, they come with differences that we should celebrate. We should, Australia Day, we should celebrate our commonalities, but we also should take the opportunity to celebrate the differences within our community, because that's the sort of thing that makes us truly unique.
On a day like this, what does it mean to you to be Australian?
I feel thrilled to be recognised with quite a large group of people who have also been honoured. I happen to have a public profile. Most of the people who have been honoured today don't, but they have done extraordinary things within their own community.
they're the people who make this place what we are. They're the people who make this country so rich.
And you can see more of that interview later today on the News Channel with Kirsty. Shortly, that's afternoons from 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on the ABC News Channel and anytime on BBC. To other news now, Germany and the US will send tanks to Ukraine in the first stage of a coordinated effort by the West to provide more modern armour to boost Kiev's firepower against Russia. Germany had initially been reluctant to allow its Leopard 2 tanks to be sent to the front line. The decision marks the first time German tanks will be used on a battlefield in Europe since the Second World War. This former Lieutenant Colonel in the German Army, Professor Sascha Buckner, who is now at the University of
It's a German tradition of pacifism. That means that Germany tries to use diplomacy and trade, for example, to influence international relations and not basically work with the hard power of, for example, getting involved militarily. Secondly, with Olaf Scholz, there's also a tradition of engaging with what was then the Soviet Union and what is now Russia, and it was changed to trade and diplomacy. It was called the Ostpolitik, and that is still very much in the mindset. The other thing is, there's this big concern that the provision of the Leopard battle tank will be seen as really escalating things, and Russia, as part of this disinformation, is using the nuclear escalation as a very powerful, you can say, disinformation tool. And lastly, there is in the German population overall strong support for supporting Ukraine. However, when it comes to the delivery of the Leopard battle tank, there the numbers are slightly smaller, and still a support, but not as heavily as supporting Ukraine in general.
Now, the US has also said it will send Abrams tanks, ones which it had said were too hard to operate and to maintain. So was their change of heart a move to support their German allies?
I think it has to be seen like this, because what we have seen in the last week is this forming of a coalition of the 10 providing nations, and with the United States stepping in and pledging to supply 31 of existence at the moment of 31 tanks, Germany then agreeing to supply immediately 14 directly of existing you can say units which are being used in the armed forces, up to 88 in the future. And then we think Poland already last week announced that they would even go without German consent, because Germany has to approve that, and that Germany is the manufacturer of these tanks. So I think the important thing is America again leading. That is the coalition of tank supplying nations, and it has a very strong political symbol as well.
These Leopard 2 tanks, as Sasha have been described as top of the range in terms of armoury. Why are they so good?
So the Leopard tank has a long tradition and was designed to, you can say, counter the tank onslaught by the then Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union. And the particular impression is the Leopard 2A6 goes back to 1979. And what military analysts always stress is it has got this combination. It has speed, it has protection for the crew, it has firepower, it has advanced optics which allow the tank actually to engage with the enemy while traveling, while driving, which is very important. And I just would like to quote a German colleague who is actually a director of the German Panzer Museum, the Tank Museum, and he's an expert. He used this comparison of a boxing match where a Leopard is basically Muhammad Ali, that is not I made up, and then basically the opponent is a heavy boxer, a heavyweight boxer. So the Russian tanks are much slower, they don't have the same optics, and the protection for the crew is much inferior. Hence, the German Leopard tank is really the right choice. And there's another issue. The German Leopard tank, it will only take between 3 to 6 weeks to train the Ukrainian troops. That's much shorter than what would be needed in order to train them on the Abrams. Secondly, there are about 3,600 Leopards globally, and in Europe alone over 2,000, and that means basically availability of spare parts, because both tanks need maintenance. The Abrams need more maintenance than the German Leopard, And given that we have these tanks in use, more than 19 nations, most of them NATO, we have the expertise and we have the material available.
So what difference will these tanks make to Ukraine's campaign against Russia? Because they won't be arriving on the ground in Ukraine for quite some time, will they?
So if everything goes according to plan, and given that Poland has already announced that it will start training, it is possible or feasible to expect their arrival by end of March. We're talking only weapon systems now. If we look at what has been asked by the head of the Ukraine Armed Forces, he asked for 300 main battle tanks plus 700 infantry fighting vehicles. And if you look at these numbers, and then you look at the tanks which were pledged, we're talking here Germany, Great Britain, United States, Poland, we're also talking about Sweden, we're talking France, then you can actually look at the creation of up to 3, you can say, tank brigades together with infantry fighting vehicles, together with close air support, like the Gepard system, which is already there, and artillery systems. And these basically 3 brigades would be very, very, very essential for the Ukrainians to counter any Russian offensive action, which is at the moment foreseen, or it's at the moment estimated that the Russians will do that end of March, but also to start and launch own offensives to recapture lost territory. So for the Ukrainian, that is absolutely crucial. And some military experts say even a number of 100 weapons would make a distinct change.
Sasha, Dov, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Emus were hunted to extinction in Tasmania after European settlers arrived. Now researchers believe it's time to reintroduce the flightless bird as part of a plan to reinvigorate the island's ecosystem. The University of Tasmania's Justin Derrick explains.
Emus arrived in Tasmania a long, long time ago, probably before people. And you may know that the Bass Strait was only formed about 14,000 years ago. When the Bass Strait formed, the emu population was isolated from the mainland emu population. And they survived alongside Aboriginal people here in Tasmania for those 14,000 years until British colonists arrived. And pretty soon after those colonists arrived, they started to hunt emus for food. They used big, purpose-bred hunting dogs, and they were mostly hunting kangaroos, but they would also take emus if they could get them. And what we found through our computer-simulated populations of emus was that the rate at which hunters, colonial hunters, were taking adult emus, it just couldn't be sustained. And eventually, the population crashed.
So why do you want to reintroduce them to the state now?
There are lots of reasons why we might want to reintroduce emus. Let me speak for a moment about a concept in ecological restoration called rewilding. It's a concept out of North America and Europe. They're very excited about reintroducing large animals into the landscape for the ecological advantages that they bring. So certain large animals have certain ecological functions in the landscape. One of the most inspiring examples in North America is the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park. They really reinvigorated the park, which is elk away from streams and allowed seedlings to regrow and stabilise streams. And those vegetated areas that grew up provided habitat for birds and changed the whole park. Now that doesn't happen every time you reintroduce a large animal, but it does happen sometimes. And perhaps it would happen here in Tasmania if we reintroduce emus.
And emus have a place in Tasmania's Aboriginal story. So before you make this move, are you going to consult the local Aboriginal community?
Well, reintroducing emus is not up to me. This is really kind of a thought experiment, a desktop experiment to start a conversation. We've done the research and we've put the idea out there, and it is up to local people and authorities to think about whether or not they would like emus back in Tasmania. Now, I'm not an Indigenous person, I can't speak for them, but I do know that emus figure in Aboriginal stories and dance and art all the way through to today here in Tasmania.
So what impact would they have on the state's ecosystem were they to be reintroduced?
I would love to find out. We don't know too much about the emus, unfortunately. They really haven't been studied very carefully, even in the mainland. We do know, however, that they're very, very good at dispersing seeds. So if you imagine an emu's beak, it's very wide, They eat just about anything and walk around picking up food off the ground, eating any old kind of food. And they pick up all sorts of seeds as they're roaming around eating. The seeds pass through their gut and they walk a long distance before they poop it out. And an emu scat is basically like 2 large handfuls of wet compost filled with seeds. But for some seeds, that gives them a real advantage when they're left out in the landscape. So basically, one of the things that emus do that we do know about is that they disperse seeds far and wide across the landscape.
Tristan Darren, thank you. Time for a look at sport now. Catherine Murphy at the Australian Open, where Novak Djokovic has blasted his way into the semi-finals.
I was really surprised last night when Novak Djokovic came out onto the court. He looked a bit tired, a bit flat, a bit irritable. He actually wasn't chasing down balls. But you know what, Djokovic, you don't have to chase down all the balls, and you can still win in straight sets over Andre Rublev, who, let's put this in perspective, he's the 5th seed. This was just not a competitive match at all. This comes off the back of Novak Djokovic's demolition of Alex de Minaur last night. He won 6-1, 6-2, 6-4, and Roz, really made me think about how much I miss, and I'm going to miss the big 3, because we're down to the big 1, and the gulf in class between Novak Djokovic and his competitors right now is frightening. Now, I also say that in the context of the world number 1, Carlos Alcaraz, not being able to play at the tournament because he had to pull out through injury. But it's making me miss the big 3 even more, Roz. Roger Federer, I don't know if you've seen this. Don't look at these pictures. It will break your heart, Roz, the tennis tragic that you are. He's just posting photos of himself looking very sharp, I might add, as does his wife Mirka, at Paris Fashion Week. He's there with Anna Wintour. It's like he's the ex-boyfriend that isn't even thinking about us here at the Australian Open. Ross, he's moved on and he's got a happy life. You shouldn't look at those pictures, Ross, okay?
Or he's just trying to take his mind off the fact that he's not here.
Oh, I love that you always have a much kinder, optimistic. You know what? I love that, Rose. I'm going to work with that, and that might help me come to terms with his absence, because all the memories of last year, including Ash Barty, are coming back as we head into semi-finals night tonight. But before we talk about that, let's hear what Novak Djokovic had to say after that win, and let's hear what's motivating him.
I always try to give my best, particularly in Grand Slams, because at this stage of my career, those are the tournaments that come most, of course. But you could say that there's something extra this year. And you could say because of the, as you mentioned, injury and what happened last year, and then I just wanted to really do well. And so far, I have a perfect score in an Australian hard court.
I think Novak Djokovic just confirming what we all saw against Alex de Minaur. He is highly motivated to win this title. Can I apologise to you, Roz, and also to Tommy Paul, his opponent in the semi-final. Tommy Paul through to his first semi-final. His best ever Grand Slam before this is at Wimbledon last year, the 4th round. He was ranked 35 coming into the tournament, just outside the seeds. I just checked his live ranking, Roz. He's at 19 now. Right now, he is a top 20 player. So credit to him. And how dare I just dismiss the opposition? It's not cool. I apologise.
No, you didn't do it lightly, of course. And you've given us great information.
Oh, thank you. Now, speaking of dismissing the competition, I'm going to get right into the women's semi-finals, because that's exactly what you did in the last bulletin. To recap, for any of our viewers who might have missed it, Ross has picked the finalists for the Women's Australian Open final in 2023. Out of the first semi-final, which takes place in Rod Laver Arena tonight, Jelena Rybakina, the reigning Wimbledon champion, Ross says she is going out of the tournament and she will be defeated by Victoria Azarenka, the 2-time champion here at Melbourne Park, in the second semi-final. Magdalena, the Polish 30-year-old who never made it past the 3rd round of a Grand Slam, through to a semi. Roz said, I'm sorry, she'll be out of the tournament tonight. That's against Arena Sabalenka. So Roz predicting a Sabalenka Azarenka final. So I'm not putting myself under any. I feel like it is best for us to leave the tipping with you today. I will add in that I think Yelena Rybakina will get the better of Victoria Azarenka and go on to win the title. But as we've always known, you are always right, Ross. So we'll just see how my week pans out.
We'll catch up this time tomorrow.
Now, just quickly before we go, the men's doubles title could yet again be won by an Australian duo.
Yes, remember the special case, remember that run they went on well. In the semi-final today, two Aussies, Jason Cooper and Ricky Hijikata, are playing in the doubles semi against the 8th seeds. Now you would think, Ross, this could be a problem. They've just got together, they're just having fun. I mean, the guys don't even have a nickname yet. It's unconfirmed as to whether you can even win a doubles title without a nickname. But they defeated the #1 seeds on the way to the semi-final, just like the special case defeated the #1 seeds on the way to their title win last year. I have a really good feeling about these guys. They play later today on Rod Laver Arena. They have asked Aussies to decide their nickname, which is a good idea because, as we know, in Australia, you do not get to decide your own nickname. In fact, if you don't like the nickname you've been designated, I find it sticks even more odds. So they're taking a very good approach. Can't wait to watch them play.
Great stuff. Enjoy all the action there this afternoon and tonight. Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Nick.
Troughs have been kicking off storms in both the east and the west. We're going to see more of that today, and courtesy of a lot of heat and some gusty winds. We've also got extreme fire danger on in parts of southwestern WA and through the interior of New South Wales as well. The focus, though, for now and through the outlook is going to be northwest. A low pressure system, tropical low, bringing widespread falls today, certainly to parts of WA and to the Territory. We're also watching out for more severe thunderstorms later on today from parts of eastern Australia. Some activity developing from this afternoon, pushing into this evening. But to the northwest, that tropical low is starting to pump in a lot of moisture, and we're going to see that continuing. And that's going to get across the low pressure system through central Australia to be picked up by fronts moving through the south, dragging wet weather pretty much right across the country in the week ahead. For the most part, not huge totals, but certainly widespread, although the northwest is likely to get a pretty decent drink on the week ahead. For your Friday, to end the working week, Brisbane, you can expect a fine day, partly cloudy, it's getting to 32 degrees. A bit cooler for Sydney, 27, you've got a possible shower around. But then Canberra's cooling off back into the 20s, 28 will be the top for you, 27 as things warm up for Melbourne and Hobart, 26 there. It's getting to 37 in Adelaide, clear blue skies. Perth's cooling off a touch, 27 will be the maximum. And for Darwin, no change, a couple of showers, maybe still, for 32.
That's ABC News for now. I'm Ross Charles. Kirsten Aiken is up next. For the day's big stories, welcome to the drama. I'm John Barrett. I'm Dan Bullshit. I'm Julia Baird. They're the team that won't miss a beat. And my name's Wayne Talk to you. What's the responsibility of the government?
For that economics, that's not right.
We have these dark chapters.
It's about First Nations people from long.
Women have been speaking up.
What happens is that we have the opportunity here to make our voices heard.
The Tron, weeknights at 6 on ABC and ABC iView. January 26th, the ABC gives you the best seats in the house for Australia Day Live to honour country and celebrate the Australian spirit. Fireworks and maritime show on the harbour with performances from some of our biggest stars: Casey Donovan, Dummy Ian, Christine Anu, William Barton, Isaiah Firepraise, and lots more. A concert for the country you won't want to miss. Australia Day Live, tonight on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
I think a lot of the parents are in the dark about what is happening inside those schools.
It's hell on earth. I wouldn't wish anyone secrets in the suburbs.
Why isn't the public aware of this? Young people are being taught ridiculous things that are unsafe.
And who's behind it?
Think about your daughters, because it will damage them.
It's kind of a big deal to make
Grand Design's House of the Year.
They make you sit up and take notice. Jolt you out of the humdrum of everyday life. This is incredible.
Join Kevin McLeod for a tour of the buildings that top the list.
They offer moments of unexpected delight and wonder.
Grand Design's House of the Year, next Thursday on ABC TV and ABC iView.
The nation marks Australia Day in diverse ways. We'll bring you wide-ranging coverage of the day's events and welcome new citizens. Tens of thousands of protesters march in our cities and towns. A man remanded in custody on charges related to the disappearance of his mum. And the US to join Germany in sending tanks to Ukraine as part of a multi-billion-dollar defence support package. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Kristen Hagan. Australia Day is being marked in many different ways as people gather at events across the country. The sails of the Sydney Opera House were illuminated at dawn with artwork by Conroy artist Peter Sampson. Traditional smoking ceremony marked the start of events in many towns and cities. Canberra's national flag raising and citizenship ceremony has seen a number of new citizens taking the pledge with the Prime Minister. Emma Thompson reports from Canberra.
I'm on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin, where earlier this morning there was around 1,000 people who gathered for the national flag raising and citizenship ceremony here in Canberra. Among those attendees was the Prime Minister and the Governor General. To start off the ceremony, we had Indigenous singer Alinta Barlow, who sang with a children's choir for our national anthem. She actually repeated that first verse in the Maori language. We've had 6 flags being raised down here, 2 of which are Aboriginal and 2 are Torres Strait Islander. There was a 21-gun salute and a flyover by the Royal Australian Air Force drew a big crowd down here to mark Australia Day. We've had 23 people from 9 countries who've taken the pledge with the Prime Minister to become new Australian citizens. They've come from all walks of life. We've had a family from Egypt where the parents are qualified pharmacists, an American couple who are award-winning astronomers, a Brazilian man who arrived here on Christmas Eve in 2005 when he was just 13 years old, and a woman from Iran who's using today to lobby for women's rights. Here's what a few of them have had to say.
Very excited.
Great. Splendid.
This means that we can, fully enjoy and, have involvement in the community here, which is, very important.
It should be all the citizens, and we can vote, we can represent our opinion, and have things going. Very
The festivities will now turn to more community-based events, which will kick off around Canberra later today.
Thousands of people have attended a protest rally in Sydney celebrating Indigenous culture and survival. Reporter Kirsty Wellauer is there. Kirsty, tell us what is happening there at the moment.
Well, I'm here at Yarmouth on Gadigal country in Sydney, and Yarmouth actually means music with a beat. And behind me, there's a number of musical performances by Indigenous artists happening today. There's also some traditional dance and traditional music being played, smoking ceremonies, and a lot of cultural events happening today. There's also a booth, speaking out booth, where there's a number of Indigenous issues that are going to be talked about, including the voice to Parliament and a number of issues that were raised as this morning's protests. And to my right, there's a number of stalls that are holding black goods, goods made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, artwork to be sold so that the community can support this movement and really celebrate 65,000 years of Aboriginal culture.
You touched on the earlier Invasion Day protests. Can you tell us a little more about those?
Yes, so this morning down at Belmore Park, we had thousands turn up for the annual January 26th Invasion Day protest march. There was a number of issues on the agenda and a number of really high-key important Indigenous voices from Sydney speaking at these events. We heard from Stolen Generation survivors, we heard from family members of people who have died in custody, and we heard from a number of people talking about treaty first and some calls around the voice That is obviously a discussion that is different for different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well as other Australians, but it was on the agenda this morning. Now the mood has shifted from those more political issues to one of celebration, to one of community and coming together and enjoying some food and some music and sitting on the lawn and just, really immersing themselves in what is the amazing culture that is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture.
Kirsty Walawa in Sydney. More than 800 people have marched from Canberra's city centre to the Aboriginal Tent Embassy to mark the day. They heard speeches from Ngunnawal people about the issues still affecting their community. Illustrated reports.
Since March through Canberra city centre today, they walked 2.5 kilometres in 31-degree heat with a series of loud and passionate messages. The group started the day gathering in Green Place and listening to speeches from local Ngunnawal people as well as speeches from Aboriginals from other states. They talked about the horrors that Indigenous people faced after invasion through the racism they still face today.
As a country, we still have a long way to go to addressing high incarceration rates, high youth suicide, living with poverty, still considered as second and third class citizens.
Enough is enough! We're sick of burying our kids! We're sick of burying our people at young ages! Look at the statistics! Look at the rates! Shame!
It also calls for an end to denting custody of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and there was a passionate debate about the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Several people spoke against it. One organiser said it does not reflect Indigenous people's sovereignty and that they're being offered crumbs. We also talked to a lot of people who took part in the marches, and they universally said they do not support the current date of Australia Day. They said they look forward to in the future when that date is changed so that all Australians can celebrate our national day. There was also a call from a lot of non-Indigenous people to the greater public. When they consider the debate about our national day, they try to consider the views of Indigenous people.
As we just heard, the upcoming referendum on an Indigenous voice to Parliament has loomed large at protest marches today. The Voice would enshrine an independent representative advisory body for First Nations people in the Constitution. The bill is set to be introduced to Parliament for scrutiny in March, with a vote expected by the second half of the year. The Prime Minister says voting yes will be a great step towards reconciliation.
I'd say to people who are contemplating what their response will be to what has been put forward. Can you imagine next year the counterfactual? Either we will have a constitution on Australia Day that recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as our first peoples in this country. That will be an act of reconciliation. Or, if the referendum is not successful, I think people know that that will not be a moment that shows respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. That I think doesn't show the maturity of us as a nation, not Indigenous Australia, who we are, acknowledging the fullness and richness of our history, but also the way that we're perceived by the world as well.
The federal opposition has been calling for more detail on the voice to Parliament. Opposition leader Peter Dutton says Australians need to make an informed decision at the referendum.
The Prime Minister doesn't understand or hasn't decided on the detail yet, so how can Australians make a decision when they're not properly informed? And as you move around the community, it's quite obvious that people don't understand what it is that the Prime Minister is talking about. They understand that changing the Constitution is a big deal, and instinctively, like me and like millions of Australians, we want better outcomes for Indigenous Australians. We don't want to see the dreadful circumstances that are the reality in Alice Springs and other parts of the Northern Territory at the moment. So we'll work with the Prime Minister. We've been very clear about that. We've got a partnering process to go through, and I think my party, like most Australians, want to see the detail. And the Prime Minister's proposed a significant change to our Constitution, the way that government will operate, the way that laws will be enacted, and I think it's incumbent on him as the Prime Minister to provide that detail.
Professor Marcia Langton is the co-writer of one of the papers outlining the policy of the Indigenous Voice co-design report. She says there is already plenty of information available on how the voice to Parliament will work.
We have a dilemma. If we release too much information, there are some politicians who will use that information and turn it into disinformation and start an argument about that. If we release too little, and there's mountains of information, but if we distribute too little information to the public, then people will feel that they're being conned. So we have to find the balance. Do you agree that there should be a voice for Indigenous Australians to the Parliament? It's a yes/no question. People say, well, what will the voice look like? After that question is answered, there's the challenge of the Parliament grappling with the detail, drafting a bill, and going through the parliamentary processes, such as sending it out to committees for scrutiny, not only by parliamentarians but by the public. So the detail will be resolved in the parliamentary process. And that's the Australian parliamentary system. That's how our democracy works.
That's Professor Marcia Langton there. And later in the hour, we will learn more about Australians honoured for their contribution to Australian life and society. We're taking a look at some of the day's other news now. And a man charged over the disappearance of his mother on the Gold Coast has been denied bail. 61-year-old Wendy Sleeman has been missing from her Eleanor home since Tuesday afternoon. Reporter Mackenzie Connor has the story.
Slade Murdoch was refused bail in a Brisbane court this morning following his arrest late yesterday. Specialist tactical officers raided a home in Toorak in Brisbane's southwestern suburbs and found him at about 5 p.m. He's now in custody. We understand he is exercising his right to silence and refusing to cooperate with the police investigation. He is charged with a list of serious offences including kidnapping, stalking, burglary, assault occasioning bodily harm, attempted arson and unlawful use of a motor vehicle. Yesterday afternoon, police divers recovered a knife as well as equipment from Wendy's home security system that had been removed and dumped in the lake behind her Eleanor home. Today, a large contingent of forensic investigators remain at the scene, combing through the property looking for clues. Detectives provided an update on the investigation this morning, confirming what many feared, that it is now transitioning from a missing persons case to a suspected homicide investigation. They also confirmed new details about how close they came to finding her, revealing that when officers arrived at her home on Tuesday afternoon, her son Slade was allegedly still in the driveway behind the wheel of her blue Honda Jazz. Investigators believe she was in the car.
I can say that the vehicle left at speed and that we were unable to intercept that. Yeah. I mean, it's an operational decision at the time. I'm confident it's the right decision made. Every minute counts as what they could have done. She's still alive, she needs to look there.
Wendy hasn't been seen or heard from since, but her blue Honda Jazz was spotted on Tuesday night on Kingston Road in Logan Central. It is now the focal point of the investigation. Police believe it holds the key to finding Wendy, and they are desperately seeking assistance from the public to track it down. Detectives say it will likely have had its number plates removed, making it easily recognisable. Anyone who sees it is urged to contact crime service.
Northern Territory Police have arrested one of the country's most wanted fugitives. Mark Horn was arrested on a yacht by the Joint Organised Crime Task Force, and the vessel attempted to sail from Cullen Bay Marina in Darwin. Australian Border Force members found the 32-year-old hiding in the hull when they boarded. Mr. Horn has been the subject of a nationwide manhunt since he fled New South Wales in October last year. They say extradition hearing in Darwin on Monday. The Northern Territory's Chief Minister says new alcohol restrictions imposed on Alice Springs won't be extended through the rest of the territory. This week, Natasha Files announced Alice Springs would see immediate new alcohol restrictions, including reduced bottle shop training hours and purchase limits. But despite crime hitting hard in other towns, she says the restrictions have been tailored just to the Alice Springs community. Ms. Files says there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, any further changes would need to be considered by consultation. Australians are continuing to take advantage of working from home arrangements, with occupancy rates of offices in capital cities still below pre-pandemic levels. Employers, landlords and retailers are now changing what's on offer to try to entice workers back.
Despite having a successful online store, Sonia Ari told her partner they had to have a shop in the city.
We said, no, we've got to go out. We've got to be out there and we've got to see people to see us.
Brands like Arwen are part of a shift in our central business districts, where the destruction of COVID has created opportunities.
Everything happens here and starts here and grows here.
Rents aren't falling, but landlords are providing more flexible leases, much shorter than the standard 5 to 7 years.
So you start to see a lot of creative, interesting entrepreneurial businesses do some different things that weren't available to them previously.
In offices, some work from home days are now permanent. Data suggests, even in cities like Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth that avoided the worst of lockdowns and restrictions, fewer workers are going to city offices than before the pandemic.
So that 3 days in the office or 2 days available flexibly seems to be something that the corporate world has settled on.
You'd expect companies to be taking on smaller, cheaper offices, but the opposite is happening.
We're seeing that people are taking up slightly more space, about 3.7% more space. But the biggest trend is actually moving into better offices.
Change is a constant in our cities. But COVID made a seemingly permanent shift in when and why people visit. Instead of relying on a steady stream of office workers, CBDs are changing what they offer to lure people back.
Sonia Ari wants to stay long term.
Having the store and people seeing it and coming and trying it and mingling with the people, they love us, so we love them too.
Love in the heart of our cities. Daniel Ziffer, ABC News.
Ukrainian forces are set to receive a boost in firepower, with Germany and the US agreeing to supply modern battle tanks. Ukraine has hailed the decision as a turning point, which may help deter an expected Russian spring offensive.
These soldiers are fighting a 21st century war with Soviet-era tanks. They're struggling to hold back Russia's front in the Donetsk region and are desperate for Western weapons.
We need more equipment, we need more weapons.
Kyiv asked its allies for 300 modern battle tanks. The US has vowed to send 31 of these, M1 Abrams, enough for 1 battalion. But there's concern the vehicles will be difficult for Ukrainians to run.
Abrams tanks are the most capable tanks in the world. They're also extremely complex to operate and maintain. So we're also giving Ukraine the parts and equipment necessary to effectively sustain these tanks on the battlefield.
Alongside American armored vehicles, more support is coming from Germany. After weeks of pressure, Berlin has agreed to send 14 of its Leopard 2 tanks, considered one of the best for warfare in Ukraine.
It gives its crew a degree of survivability that the Russian tanks can't even come close to.
But in Germany, there is reluctance to send offensive weaponry. Some still feeling the weight of history as an aggressor in 2 world wars.
Trust me, trust the German government. Since we are coordinating efforts on an international level, we will continue to ensure that this support is possible without the risks for our country.
Germany's decision paves the way for other European countries to send their level 2 tanks onto Ukraine. Already, leaders here in the UK have promised to send a squadron of Challenger 2 tanks to be on the ground in the coming months. Kremlin officials have labelled the tank supply as provocation by the West.
There is no offensive threat to Russia.
It will be months before any new tanks are on the battlefront. Until then, Ukrainians will have to use what they have. Isabel Higgins, ABC News.
A man has been arrested after fatally stabbing 2 people and injuring 5 others on a train in northern Germany. The man randomly attacked several passengers midway through the journey on a regional train bound for Hamburg. It's unclear how the attack ended, but there are unconfirmed reports. A fellow passenger held the attacker down until police could board the train. Police are investigating possible motives. At least one person has been killed and several more injured in a stabbing attack in a church in southern Spain. Police have arrested a man who they allege was wielding either a machete or a samurai sword when he attacked churchgoers in a parish in Algeciras. According to local media, the parish priest is among the injured and is in a serious condition. An investigation has been launched to determine the motive behind the attack. The coldest winter in more than a decade is causing deaths and havoc across Asia, cancelling flights and travel plans. Record snowfall and blizzards in parts of Japan have brought traffic and trains to a standstill, with authorities urging people to stay home. The Arctic winds have seen temperatures in North China drop to as low as minus 53 degrees. The cold snap has already killed more than 120 people in Afghanistan, with some regions completely cut off by snow. Many aid groups have suspended operations in recent weeks due to the Taliban's rule banning female workers.
If you can't help us rescind the ban, give us the exemptions to allow women to operate. I was in one of the Taliban ministries yesterday, specifically talking about the need for nutrition, what we call water, sanitation and nutrition, where women's work is particularly vital to the success of the operation. So the winter is a worry. It's not the only worry. But I think the next few weeks are absolutely crucial.
An Iranian chess player who defected to Spain after she competed without a hijab has met the Spanish Prime Minister in Madrid. Sarah Cadell had taken part in a championship held in Kazakhstan in late December without a hijab, resulting in a warning from Iran telling her not to return to her country. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, has tweeted he's learned a lot from a woman who inspires him. He's added he supports all women athletes and her example contributes to a better world. It is possible humans can understand gestures used by chimpanzees to communicate with each other. Scientists have gotten volunteers to watch videos and then translate animals' gestures. The results indicate this form of communication may be the origin of our verbal communication.
Grooming builds bonds of friendship.
Our closest living relatives, social, intelligent primates that communicate without speaking. And it seems that we humans can tune into this silent gesturing language. Researchers who spent years observing great apes closely in the wild have recorded a whole gesture dictionary, dozens of signals, expressions, and movements that chimps and bonobos use to communicate. By showing videos of these gestures to volunteers, scientists discovered that more than half the time, people are able to understand the message that a wild chimp or bonobo is trying to convey. Here's how a chimpanzee says, "Groom me, please." And this is a bonobo silently demanding food from a companion. Some gestures are easier for us to understand than others. This display is apparently flirtation. But the fact that we can derive meaning from these gestures suggests that they provided a foundation for our own language.
Our last common ancestors with bonobos and chimpanzees probably used quite similar gestures, and that these gestures may have then gone on to scaffold the evolution of human gesture and human language as we know it now.
Gorillas, orangutans, and other great apes also use some of these same signals. It's something that people who work with these primates tune into every day.
Gesture is so important to great apes. All of the little ways they need to regulate their social interactions in these amazingly complex social worlds they live in. It's the sort of communicative grease that gets all of that working.
These gestures and our ability to interpret them, the researchers say, sends a scientific message about how our own language evolved.
An auction for 5 franchises in the first ever Women's Cricket Premier League in India has seen winning bids pay more than $800 million. That's more than was paid for the inaugural men's IPL franchises back in 2008. In February, further records are expected to be set when bidding starts for the world's best players, with Australians set to feature prominently. The Tickets Tracy Holmes joins me in the studio now with more.
Hi, Tracy. This was on top of a record-setting deal for the TV rights.
Yeah, it seems like every week out of India comes a new record for women's sport. And so Viacom were the successful bidders for the TV rights, and that's for a 5-year period. The first 5 years of this Women's Premier League, which we call the WPL. So from 23 to 27, they paid $170 million, which works out at about $1.25 million per match. The entire competition is going to be played in March, so it's only a 1-month comp with these 5 teams that you've spoken about. Each team will have up to 7 overseas-based players per year. Per competition, and a $2 million salary cap. So big news for women's sport.
And are the teams the same as we see in the men's IPL?
3 of the teams will be the same. So we've got the Mumbai Indians, the Delhi Capitals, the Royal Challengers of Bangalore, and then there's 2 other teams. One of them is owned by Capri Global Holdings. That'll be based in Lucknow. The other one is going to be based in Ahmedabad, and that is owned by Adani Sports Line, which is part of the greater Adani Group. That name is familiar here in Australia, as we know, with mining interests. Gautam Adani is the 4th richest man in the world. Until yesterday, he was the 3rd richest. He's slipped back just 1 position, but still has a lot of money. And he's not new to sport either. He's got this sort of subset of businesses that look at sport right around the world. This is his latest interest. But the assistant editor of ESPN Cricinfo has more on the whole Adani sports interests.
They have a sports line called Adani Sports Line. They own a T20 team in the UAE based T20 league that is going on right now that is called the Gulf Giants. And they spend more money than anybody else who is there to buy a women's franchise. Nearly 1,280 or 900 crore rupees, and their team is going to be based out of Kerala or Gujarat Giants. They also own boxing teams, a polo team, and a kabaddi team as well. So it's not the first time they know how to run sports teams.
So Tracy, what does this tell us about businesses?
Well, I think what's interesting, if you just look at that particular franchise from the Adani Group, they paid $223 million just to have the license. So we're seeing women's sport really escalating. We're seeing that it's still a massive area of growth in world sport globally, particularly when it comes to cricket in India. And we probably see India at the apex now. One of the things to look out for is that when the Olympics rolls around in Brisbane 2032, cricket most probably will be an Olympic sport. And, with the growth of the women's game and 1.4 billion people there, it's something that is an opportunity that is just going to keep escalating.
They were a group of boys from outback New South Wales who went on to become trailblazers in Indigenous hip-hop music. The group of boys known as the Wilcannia Mob. The group drew global attention for the song Downriver. 20 years on, it's time to look at the Wilcannia Mob's legacy and the future for other young people in the outback.
The Wilcannia Mob's recognition at the 2003 Dudley Awards was a moment to remember.
First of all, we'd like to thank everyone who supported us and voted for us.
Band manager Brendan Adams came to Wilcannia as part of a community outreach program to give vulnerable youth opportunities.
In remote communities throughout Australia was very high, and they wanted to reach positive programs to get out people.
Roy Johnson is among 2 of the group's 5 original members still living in Wilcannia. Noticed by English rapper MIA, Wilcannia Mob spread their RPG culture across the globe. Good Mob workshopper Morgan Moore has helped discover the group and says their music has had a lasting impact.
That opened ears and minds to possibilities of wow, we can take hip hop and we can use hip hop to tell our stories.
Being part of the Wilcannia Mob was an incredible opportunity for them as a group. The local kids growing up here today might not always be able to realise their potential.
The moment you focus and invest, that's where we invest in young people, you will build them to be the leaders.
Pushing
It seems there's more to come for young people in this outback community. News of Saturday, ABC News, Canberra.
You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC Review. Here are the top stories on ABC News. Rallies have drawn tens of thousands of people across the country in protest to the national holiday. Crowds in Sydney heard speeches before setting off for the march, which closed several blocks in the CBD. Elsewhere, protests have been held under the theme Treating with Full Voice. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has led some of the country's newest citizens in making their pledge at the national ceremony in Canberra. People gathered across Australia to mark the national holiday, with events ranging from ferry races to celebrations of Indigenous culture. The man charged over the disappearance of his mother on the Gold Coast has been denied bail. 61-year-old Wendy Sleeman disappeared from her Elanora home on Tuesday afternoon. Her son, 30-year-old Slade Murdoch, is charged with multiple offences, including unlawful stalking, burglary, and kidnapping. And a 3-metre-long crocodile has been caught after being spotted wandering the streets of a town in WA's north. The freshwater crocodile was spotted in the Kimberley town of Fitzroy Crossing at about 2 o'clock this morning. Police officers and local rangers were eventually able to wrangle the reptile back into the Fitzroy River. Hundreds of people from all walks of life are being celebrated for their years of devoted service to the wider community, the Australian Day Honours. Among them are 354 women, or 48% of all recipients, the most in the history of the awards. One of the highest honours has been bestowed on Archie Roach, who died last year.
Singer-songwriter Archie Roach has been posthumously awarded Companion of the Order of Australia. He acknowledges his dedication to performing arts, Indigenous rights and reconciliation. Archie Roach is also been celebrated for his support of Norwegian First Nations artists over a career that spanned 40 years.
We talked about these sorts of things, and I remember him saying, it's actually not about the person that's being awarded, it's about the community. I think he would have been really chuffed.
Actor Claudia Carter also acknowledged for her celebrating career, which began in the 1980s with films. She went on to become a star of the small screen.
We have an incredible talent pool here in Australia. It's something that overseas, but then a lot of them come back, and so our music just gets richer and more knowledgeable.
Philip Noyce has been honoured for his work as a film director, including the groundbreaking Roman Creek Fence in 2002.
I never thought I'd get paid to make movies, and yet 54 years later, I haven't done anything else.
Prolific Melbourne writer Robert Mann has been honoured for his service to tertiary education, political and social commentary, and to the Indigenous community.
We had a very controversial life, and the recognition that I've contributed something to the country I care about deeply matters to me a lot.
Among those recognised for their outstanding work in the Indigenous community is Katrina Fanning from Canberra, who graduate woman played for the Australian Telerobbers for 14 years and continues to lead the fields of education and health.
It does come on Australia Day, so it has some mixed feelings, but for me it's about reflecting on our past and then forgetting where we've come from and the people that came before me, but also looking to the future and what's possible for us.
Denise Smith-Harley from Western Australia is dedicated to documenting her native language. The English says Australia is losing languages at one of the highest rates in the world.
It's been a hard ride, but it's been the most beautiful job I've ever had in my life. And enhancing my language and culture.
David Paulson from Sydney has helped in the fight to find a cure for HIV and educating others about the virus. In 1984, he became one of the first people in Australia to learn he was HIV positive. He refused to give up hope.
So I made a decision within probably 30 seconds of diagnosis that I would do anything in terms of medical science, know more about HIV and try and help find a treatment and cure.
Fred Alam has been celebrated for his work within Victoria's African communities. A member of Melbourne's Nigerian community, he co-founded the city's annual African Music and Cultural Festival.
African Australia today is sadly
all walks of life have been seen as much. And so this honor actually means a lot. In Queensland, the Edmonton's work in suicide prevention has been acknowledged. 2 years after the death of her brother in 2008, she founded the organisation Roses in News.
Back then, the word suicide wasn't talked about, and it was really clear that the people who actually experienced suicide really would have been heard.
Barbara and David Rubenite fostered more than 400 children in their rural home on the outskirts of Cobargo in New South Wales. They continued even after losing their home in the 2019 bushfires.
I suppose we get a lot of enjoyment out of it and say, oh, you know, it's so good for kids. But I think that it's been really, really good for me.
The recipients or family members will receive their awards in ceremonies around the country in the coming months. Jane Wakeman, ABC News.
He's one of Australia's most recognisable stars of the stage and screen, playing a leading role in everything from quintessential Australian films such as Get the Square and Boys to Hollywood blockbusters including The 300, Peter Rabbit and Elvis. Today, David Wenham has been recommended for the Australia for his contribution to the arts. I sat down with him and spoke about his career, his work at the Wayside Chapel and his Australia Day. Congratulations to you. What does this honour mean to you?
I got to say, initially I was rather surprised. I received an email in my inbox. Luckily, I didn't delete it because it was a curious email that just should have been in the spam box. So when I opened it up and read the email, my initial reaction was I was surprised. And then reading it again, I've got to say I was quite chuffed. I was chuffed and honoured that somebody in the community had put in the work and suggested me for this particular honorific.
You've got a long list of credits to your name on both stage and screen. Do you have a proudest moment?
Well, that's an interesting question. Proudest moment. Not proudest moment. I have pieces of work in my back catalogue that I'm fonder of than others. There's some particular movies. Getting Square is a local film that I think still travels the distance.
Tell us a few more of them.
Early ones are The Wars, which is a film, the Capital Stage play that I did go 70 years ago, maybe 35 years ago or more. Into the theatre in King's Cross, which was The Griffin, became a feature film directed by Robin Woods, and that premiered at the Berlin Film Festival. I'm proud of the film, and that film is about talks for me internationally.
How have you seen Australia's film and TV scene evolve during your career?
It's changed massively. The big change over in my lifetime in the industry is the advent of streaming television. When I graduated from college years ago, there was a huge difference. I trained as a theatre actor, so I took the left-hand turn very early on into screen. When I did, there was a huge differential between big screen and small screen, and actors never really crossed over. And television back then was actually looked down upon in terms of creative viewpoint. That has changed completely now. You have incredible people directing projects for television. It seems to me that's the medium that people use to be entertained.
How does the creative community tell the story of Australia, and do you believe it does it well?
How does the creative community tell the story of Australia? I think it's impossible to do it on a macro scale, so you have to do it a little bit more. A lot of those little small piecemeal chunks will paint a lovely tapestry of what Australia is and who we are as Australians. I'm talking about coming out to the moment stage television and film. The faces that you see now are far more representative of who we are at the moment than we were 20 years ago. So I think it's changing for the better.
And do you think that diversity you're referring to then changes the stories that we are telling?
I think the diversity in our screen culture at the moment is probably reflective of a more honest viewpoint of who we are. Something like 23-24% of our population are born overseas. So a quarter of our population are, they come with differences that we should celebrate. Australia Day we should celebrate our commonalities, but we also should take the opportunity to celebrate the differences within our community, because that's the sort of thing that makes us truly unique.
You've been an ambassador to the Wayside Chapel for nearly 20 years. Can you talk to us about your work with the homeless and what keeps you going back?
I was asked, I don't know how many years ago, something like 20 years ago, if I would become an ambassador for Wayside. At the time, I lived just down the road, a few hundred metres from Wayside in King's Cross. The pastor who took over at the time, Graham, an incredible man who was recognised in the Australia Day Awards a few years ago, he decided to get the community involved. At the time, there was not great community support for that building or the people who lived on the street there. Graham Long, I think, changed the community in the most profound way. He got people like myself involved to spread the word of Wayside. He raised an incredible amount of money to develop that building into something that was habitable. Now it's a place where people can visit and people can be heard and people, can be listened to. People within the community of King's Cross, Potts Point now, don't look at people on the street as faceless people anymore. They look at people on the street, like a resident who passed away only just over a week ago, Auntie Rosie. People knew her, people spoke with her. She was an incredible woman, and her legacy, I think, is the fact that people within the community of King's Cross and Potts Point now actually engage with people on the street and don't treat them as faceless people, but they're people with faces and with a heart and with a history.
On a day like this, what does it mean to you to be Australian?
I feel thrilled to be recognised within quite a large group of people who have also been honoured. I happen to have a public profile. Most of the people who've been honoured today don't, but they have done extraordinary things within their own community. So I look forward to whenever the day is, when I go to the government house and I can meet some of these people and hear their stories, because they're the people who make this place what we are. They're the people who make this country so rich.
On a day like this, do you spend any time reflecting on the divisions this day also causes in our community, the hurt that it does pose for some First Australians?
Undoubtedly. I don't think anybody in the country is unaware of the situation that this Australia Day, on this particular day, does actually cause a lot of hurt to people within our community, specifically First Nations people, with, understandably so. If there was an opportunity for it to be, acknowledged or celebrated on another day that brought everybody together, I think that would be a marvellous thing.
Now, David, you recently did a terrific interview series for the ABC, so I'm going to put you on the spot, or you get to judge me right now. What is the question that you would ask you?
Oh, okay. That's a really tricky question.
What should I be asking you today, David?
Well, it depends, because this interview has a specific purpose. It's on this particular day. There's many questions that you could ask me that have never been asked, and that might be interesting, but today's not the day for that. I'm going to have to take that on notice, I think, and come back to you next time I sit down and have a chat with you.
We're going to take that as a promise.
All right, I'm with you. Yeah. I'll keep my promises.
David Wenham, congratulations. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
A Survival Day event is being held for just the second time in the southern New South Wales regional city of Griffith. And the event has welcomed not just the Indigenous community, but anyone who wanted to join and learn about Aboriginal history and culture. Reporter Ronnie Stevens has more from Griffith.
The temperature is warming up as hundreds of people gather at the Survival Day event here in Griffith on Wiradjuri country. This is just the second time this event has been held. Last year it attracted more than 700 people, with organisers hopeful there could be thousands that attended today. It's also an all-inclusive event, so everyone in the community is being invited to come along and participate. It's getting pretty hot here with a top of 36 degrees expected today. So it's quite fitting that it's being held at the local aquatic centre and kids have been jumping in the pool to cool off all morning. But the feature of today will be Indigenous traditions and activities with plenty of arts and craft stalls, music and singing on display. I've been asking people what January 26th means to them, and in every response they've mentioned the word survival. Many have been reflecting on the survival of their people and culture, as well as the impact colonisation had on them, their parents and their grandparents, and the impact it still has to this day. I spoke to Wiradjuri woman Desmond Newman earlier, and she said she hopes today would be an opportunity to showcase Indigenous culture.
We want to share with the entire community. We see a lot in Griffith, we're always sharing other cultures and we learn about other cultures, which is great. We love sharing about theirs, but we also want to share ours. Especially now with the young population coming through, what we've had to offer, this is our second year, and it's just getting bigger and better and growing. And the smaller ones getting involved to the adults and to our elders, so it's for everyone, all different nations, cultures. We don't discriminate, we love everyone to be here.
So as you heard there today, it really is an opportunity for the entire community of Griffith to come along, to get together, to learn about Indigenous history and culture, and also to have some fun.
The flood-affected community of Lismore in northern New South Wales is slowly recovering after catastrophic flooding in the last year. What's kept many people going has been the grassroots community support, which is being celebrated today after the whole town's postcode was nominated for Citizen of the Year. Robert Herbert reports from Lismore.
11 months ago, the city of Lismore was underwater, but today it's been about celebrating and recognising those people and community groups who really have pitched in and lended a hand in the flood recovery response. So much so that even the postcode of Lismore, everyone who makes up this community was nominated for the Citizen of the Year award. In the end, it was an individual, Sophia Watt, who set up a kitchen that just catered for so many people who required food in the days, weeks and months after the flood.
It would be thousands of people, adult people, and I did have people doing up to 1,400 meals a week. So as you can imagine, over 11 months, that's just chaos.
Attention now turns to the flood anniversary next month and also the ongoing support needed for people to get back into their homes. Across this region, there are still 600 people who are in emergency accommodation. There are hundreds more who are in their homes, but they're in fairly basic and primitive conditions. The Reconstruction Corporation is overseeing the Resilient Homes package. There's still only about 130 people, we understand, who have been given a response in terms of a potential buyback of the like. So it's a slow recovery for the community.
Emus were hunted to extinction in Tasmania after European settlers arrived, but now researchers believe it is time to reintroduce the flightless bird as part of a plan to reinvigorate the island's ecosystem. Dr. Tristan Duro from the University of Tasmania School of Natural Science says the emu could become a poster bird for rewilding programs.
Emus arrived in Tasmania a long time ago, probably before people did. And you may know that the Bass Strait was only formed about 14,000 years ago. When the Bass Strait formed, the emu population was isolated from the mainland emu population. And they survived alongside Aboriginal people here in Tasmania for those 14,000 years until British colonists arrived. And pretty soon after those colonists arrived, they started to hunt emus for food. They used big purpose-bred hunting dogs, and they were mostly hunting kangaroos, but they were also taking emus if they could get them. And what we found through our computer-simulated populations of emus was that the rate at which hunters, colonial hunters, were taking adult emus, it just couldn't be sustained. And eventually, the population crashed. There are lots of reasons why we might want to reintroduce emus. Let me speak for a moment about a concept in ecological restoration called rewilding. That's a concept out of North America and Europe. They're very excited about reintroducing the large animals into the landscape for the ecological advantages that they bring. So certain large animals have certain ecological functions in the landscape. One of the most inspiring examples in North America is the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park. They really reinvigorated the park, which has elk away from streams and allowed seedlings to regrow and stabilise streams. And those vegetated areas that grew up provided habitat for birds and changed the whole park. Now that doesn't happen every time that you reintroduce a large animal, but it does happen sometimes. And perhaps it would happen here in Tasmania if we reintroduce eagles.
Kimberley locals have spent a sleepless night trying to catch a large crocodile that's emerged from floodwaters and then found roaming the streets of Fitzroy Crossing. The 3-metre animal was found by a resident in the early hours of the morning. Police officers, Shire Rangers and Aboriginal Rangers used whatever equipment they had to try to wrangle the reptile. At one point, a police officer threw a towel on the animal's head to try to subdue it. The crocodile has been returned to the flooded Fitzroy River. Let's now turn to the tennis with Catherine Murphy, who's at Melbourne Park for us to report on all things the Australian Open. And Tennis Australia has just released a statement. What has it had to say?
Hello to you, Kirsten. They have indeed, and that's because last night, both during Novak Djokovic's match against Andrei Rublev and afterwards in the precinct, a number of Russian fans were spotted with Russian flags on the precinct. One of those flags had an image of Vladimir Putin. Now, Tennis Australia have released a statement today. They're saying a small group of people did display inappropriate flags and symbols, and they threatened security guards. Following that match, they were then evicted. One patron is still assisting police with unrelated matters. They've also said, Kirsten, that players and their teams have been briefed and reminded of the event policy regarding flags and symbols, and to avoid any situation that has the potential to disrupt the Australian Open. No doubt more to come on this story, Kirsten.
Absolutely. Now, the build-up to the women's semi-final night is well and truly on. First up, it is the back of the Grand Slam champions. Who do you expect will win?
Good question, Kirsten. So it's the reigning Wimbledon champion, Elena Rybakina, taking on the 2-time champion, Victoria Azarenka, right here at Rod Laver. They're first on court tonight. Now, Elena Rybakina, I feel like she will be feeling motivated because when she won Wimbledon, it was almost like it was such a big surprise. People talked about her as if, will she be a one-hit wonder or can she back it up? She is proving that she can absolutely back it up, Kirsten. She dismantled the game of the world number 1, Iga Swiatek, on the way to the final. She's in stunning form, but she's taking on a 2-time champion in Victoria Azarenka, and we've all been stunned by her tennis resurgence. What a story it's been. Of course, she won 2 titles. That was 10 years ago that she won her 2 titles at the Australian Open. She's back in a semi-final. She defeated Jessica Pegula, who was the favourite for the tournament, easily to book her spot in the semi-final. And because, Kirsten, you've been so flawless with the tips, I'm going to get you to pick. Is it Azarenka or is it indeed Rybakina tonight? What are you thinking?
To be honest, I really don't know. I was thinking that I could tip one player 1 hour and then the next hour we talk, I could tip the other because I had no idea. Who are you going?
Well, that's a really good idea. So for this hour, I'm going to do this too. Kirsten, you're the brains of this operation. In this hour alone, don't write it down, viewers. I'm going to tip Rybakina because she's been in stunning form. But the other semi-final, Kirsten, that is really interesting because you've got 2 women who are great stories for different reasons. Neither of them have ever been to a Grand Slam final. And we're talking, of course, about the 30-year-old Polish player, Magdalena, through to the semi-final, the final 4 of a tournament, having never made it past the 3rd round, which is hard to believe. She's ranked 45 in the world. She's taking on the world number 5, Arina Sabalenka, who won a title in Adelaide in the build-up. She's played multiple semi-finals in the past, but she's never made it to the final of a Grand Slam. In this hour alone, Kirsten, and you can come with me on this journey, I'm going to back Sabalenka, but you just never know what Magdalena is capable of.
Look, while we're talking the women's semis, I am now prepared to make a tip on tonight's match. I'm going to also back Rebecca.
Amazing.
Yeah, the reigning Wimbledon
Okay, love it.
I'm going to watch
I
it.
love it. Okay, I love it if we're both right for once, because all week you've been right and I've been wrong, but now I'm on Team Kirsten's tipping schedule. I feel like for once I can come back to work tomorrow, I really hope, with a bit of a stroke in my step. You know what I mean, Kirsten? I haven't been feeling great about our process.
Now, Kat, there are no special Ks at the Australian Open this year, but an Aussie duo is attempting to book a spot in the men's doubles final to make it back-to-back titles for Australia.
Yes, they are indeed. Can you believe it, Kirsten? A year up to the special Ks took us on that journey at the Australian Open. Nick Kyrgios, he'd gone out in round 2. Thanasi Kokkinakis had gone out in round 1 after winning his home tournament, the Adelaide International, put together. They bonded to become the special Ks. They're now the stars of a Netflix documentary. But would you believe it? There might be back-to-back Aussie winners in men's doubles, and that is because two mates, Jason Kubler and Rinky Hijikata, who had very successful singles results in their own right, they've teamed up and they've made it to the semi-finals. Today, they are taking on the 8th seeds. Right now, it's on serve 3-0 in the first set. The big question is how far can they go? Their biggest issue, Kirsten, is they don't have a nickname yet. They're very aware of the fact that the special Ks were very catchy. It was a phenomenon, and they got such good support here at the Australian Open because of that. Here's hoping Rinky, who made it to the second round, and he lost to Tsitsipas, who's still in the tournament. So that was a noble loss, I think we can call it. Jason Kubler, he lost to Hachinov, who's also in the semi-finals. So these guys, really unlucky with their draws, lost in the second round. What can they do together? That's the question. Before I leave you, Kirsten, I will say I am so looking forward to seeing the original 9 of women's tennis watch the semi-finals tonight, led by Billie Jean King. They broke away from the tour in 1970 to ensure that women got paid what they were owed. They're still fighting that fight because women get paid equally at Grand Slams, but not at all tournaments. They're right here in Melbourne. What an honour it is to have them in this town. The original 9 essentially started the women's professional tour. Always good to have Billie Jean King in the house.
It'll be a special moment indeed. Kath, we will speak to you again later in the afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tomorrow's weather for the capital cities now. Brisbane mostly sunny. Sydney a possible shower. Canberra cloudy. Melbourne and Hobart fine. Sunny in Perth and Adelaide. And Darwin a possible thunderstorm with the top of 32 degrees. Quick reminder, you can keep up to date on all the latest news across all your devices. Just go to news.abc.net.au or into ABCI with Kirsten Aiken. Great to have you with us. I'll have more on our top stories coming out in just a couple of minutes from ABC's.
This Australia Day, reflect, respect and celebrate. The day begins with a Woolloomooloo morning ceremony. Then the National Citizenship and Flag Raising Ceremony. Later, there's an Indigenous perspective on January 26. And end the day with a spectacular concert of the country live from Sydney Harbour. That's Australia Day, today from 7:30 on ABC TV and ABC Radio.
I'm having fun one night.
That could be a good one, no?
I hope someday that I'll find somebody to give my heart to.
Finding love can be hard.
I'm too nervous. I think I'm going to pass out. You don't mind dating?
They're taking their first steps.
Well, you look okay. You look very nice yourself. Into the dating world. I'll never try. I think she's very nice. You do a lot of dating work. Better date than never. Tuesday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView. You made that sound really creepy. That's when you thought things would get weirder. Sam, colonoscopies is your
The new season of Heart Quiz starts February 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
For nearly a decade, one award-winning television show has dared to go where others fear to tread. Insightful, intrepid, in slow-mo. They say that covering the news is like trying to drink from a fire hose. One man is prepared for the challenge. Actually, I've changed my mind. The Weekly returns Wednesday, February 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
It's family time on ABC iView. Stream family favorites for free all summer on ABC iView. Thousands attend Invasion Day rallies across the country with the voice referendum in the spotlight. Australia Day is marked with revelry and reflection as new citizens are welcomed. A man remanded in custody on charges related to the disappearance of his mother. And the US joined Germany in sending tanks to Ukraine as part of a multi-billion-dollar defence support package. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Kristen Hayden. Australia Day is being marked at events across the country. Smoking ceremonies have been held at Sydney's Barangaroo and at Elder Park in Adelaide CBD, among many others. There are also protests drawing tens of thousands of people in towns and cities across the country. Let's first go to Sydney, where thousands have gathered at Victoria Park to celebrate Indigenous culture and survival. Our reporter Kirsty Willow is there.
Well, I'm here at Yarwun on Gadigal country in Sydney, and Yarwun actually means music with a beat. And behind me, there's a number of musical performances by Indigenous artists happening today. There's also some traditional dance and traditional music being played, smoking ceremonies, and a lot of cultural events happening today. There's also a booth, speaking out booth, where there's a number of Indigenous issues that are going to be talked about, including the voice to Parliament and a number of issues that were raised at this morning's protests. And to my right, there's a number of stalls that are holding black goods, goods made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, artwork to be sold so that the community can support this movement and really celebrate 65,000 years of Aboriginal culture.
You touched on the earlier Invasion Day protests. Can you tell us a little more about those?
Yes, so this morning down at Belmore Park, we had thousands turn up for the annual January 26th Invasion Day protest march. There was a number of issues on the agenda and a number of really high-key important Indigenous voices from Sydney speaking at these events. We heard from Stolen Generations survivors, we heard from family members of people who have died in custody, and we heard from a number of people talking about Treaty First and some calls around the voice. That is obviously a discussion that is different for different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well as other Australians, but it was on the agenda this morning. Now the mood has shifted from those more political issues to one of celebration, to one of community and coming together and enjoying some food and some music and sitting on the lawn and just, really immersing themselves in what is the amazing culture that is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture.
Let's go to Perth now, where hundreds of people have gathered in the CBD for an Australia Day protest. Speakers at the event have been calling for people to oppose the proposed Indigenous bills to Parliament. David Webber is there. He joins us now. David, bring us up to date with the situation where you are.
It's a very warm day here today, especially here at Forest Place in the city. It's taken on a bit of a festive atmosphere in the last 2 minutes. as you say, firstly, paying the song treaty. There's another song going on behind me. Hopefully, you can still hear me. But earlier on, the speakers really did focus on the importance of treaty as opposed to the voice. They spoke against the voice. They said there hadn't been enough consultation with grassroots Indigenous people, spoke out against the Uluru Statement of the Heart. And in fact, one speaker went back to the native title negotiations in the 1990s, saying mining companies, or according to him, mining companies had gone to land councils and sorted out deals without speaking to what he referred to as the left side of Aboriginal politics. So those speakers that are actually saying that the voice should be ignored, in fact, people should be voting no and checking the referendum as a whole. That's coming from a segment of what we're hearing today in terms of the Australian protests, which we think as well as a strange debate. But I mean, a lot of Aboriginal people voicing Western Australia to be supporting voice. It's going to be a debate that's ongoing, obviously. But today, really, that anti-voice message is really coming through a real pro-treaty voice, quoting the likes of Michael Manson and so on, and really having the whole process. Back to you, Chris.
David, we've been there. One final question. How long is that protest expected to last, and are other events planned in the
Well, this is the main one for Aboriginal people in terms of opposing Australia Day. It's likely that this will end with a march around the city, and then it will really likely end. It is a hot day. It probably has kept numbers down, as well as being a public holiday. Probably more than 1,000 people here at the moment.
David, we're back. Canberra's national flag raising and citizenship ceremony has been held with a number of new citizens taking a pledge with Prime Minister Thompson.
I'm on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin, where earlier this morning there was around 1,000 people who gathered for the national flag raising and citizenship ceremony here in Canberra. Among those attendees was the Prime Minister and the Governor General. To start off the ceremony, we had Indigenous singer Alinta Barlow, who sang with the children's choir for our national anthem. She actually repeated that first verse in Ngunnawal language. We've had 6 flags being raised down here, 2 of which are Aboriginal and 2 are Torres Strait Islander. There's a 21-gun salute and a flyover by the Royal Australian Air Force drew a big crowd down here to mark Australia Day. We've had 23 people from 9 countries who have taken the pledge with the Prime Minister to become new Australian citizens. They've come from all walks of life. We've had a family from Egypt, where the parents are qualified pharmacists, an American couple who are award-winning astronomers, a Brazilian man who arrived here on Christmas Eve in 2005 when he was just 13 years old, and a woman from Iran who's using today to lobby for women's rights. Here's what a few of them have had to say.
Very excited. Great. Splendid. This means that we can, fully enjoy and, have involvement in the community here, which is very important.
It should be all about citizens. And we can vote, we can have our opinion, and things loving it.
The festivities will now turn to more community-based events, which will kick off around Canberra later today.
Australia Day celebrations are underway in the Northern Territory with the annual Youth Run. It will see hundreds of youths travel across Darwin to raise money in support of children with disability.
Well, here in Darwin, as you can probably see, there's plenty of youths. They're all about to take part in the annual Australia Day Youth Run, which is raising money for a variety of local charity supports children living with disabilities in the territory. They're hoping to raise about 15 grand. But amongst all the good work, there's also some very Australian things. I bumped into my old mate here, Paul. You're running a barbecue off the back of the ute.
Off the back of the ute. Is it any more Australian than that old Aussie-built car? Lamb chops on the barbecue on Australia Day morning.
And so, how many times have you been doing the ute run?
It's the third run in a row. So, third year round. So we get up at about 3:30, leave the rural area. We're out the gates by 4:30.
And I've got to ask, how do you get a barbecue working on the back of the ute?
Well, as long as you're not trying to cook and drive at the same time, that's pretty easy. We get up here as soon as we're on the grid, start the coals up, about half an hour later, the lamb chops are on.
Now, what's the secret to a perfect lamb chop?
Well, get barbie nice and hot. As soon as those coals are really burning and the grill's warm, chop straight on, really hot. A couple of minutes later, turn them, and then straight off, soak them in tomato sauce and mint jelly. Can't beat it.
Now, I think you might be able to answer this question in advance. A lot of people Australia Day, a bit about it for them is, celebrating things to them that are Australian. Is there any kind of Aussie slang or phrases that you really love?
Well, we started with the t-shirts that we're wearing. You little ripper. How much more Aussie than that does it get?
And just finally, why get up early in the morning and drive a ute about 30 odd k's out to Noonamah?
It's all part of the whole day, the whole community coming together. Everyone in Australia got their own interests. Us down here are car enthusiasts, so we like to bring the two together. We love our cars and we love our country, and let's bring it all together and celebrate all at once.
Well, certainly you can smell the diesel here. It won't just be all taking off. They'll all be heading on about a 30-kilometre convoy from this raceway here out to the Noonamah pub, where they'll be enjoying some more festivities across January 26.
A man charged over the disappearance of his mother on the Gold Coast has been denied bail. 61-year-old Wendy Sleeman has been missing from her Elanora home since Tuesday afternoon. Reporter Mackenzie Colahan has the story.
Slade Murdoch was refused bail in a Brisbane court this morning following his arrest late yesterday. Specialist tactical officers raided a home in Durack in Brisbane's southwestern suburbs and found him at about 5 p.m. He's now in custody. We understand he is exercising his right to silence and refusing to cooperate with the police investigation. He is charged with a list of serious offences including kidnapping, stalking, burglary, assault occasioning bodily harm, attempted arson and unlawful use of a motor vehicle. Yesterday afternoon, police divers recovered a knife as well as equipment from Wendy's home security system that had been removed and dumped in the lake behind her Elanora home. Today, a large contingent of forensic investigators remain at the scene, combing through the property looking for clues. Detectives provided an update on the investigation this morning, confirming what many feared, that it is now transitioning from a missing persons case to a suspected homicide investigation. They also confirmed new details about how close they came to finding her, revealing that when officers arrived at her home on Tuesday afternoon, her son Slade was allegedly still in the driveway behind the wheel of her blue Honda Jazz. Investigators believe she was in the car.
I can say that the vehicle left at speed and that we were unable to intercept that. I mean, it's an operational decision at the time. I'm confident it's the right decision to made. Every minute counts at this particular time. She's still alive, she needs help there.
Wendy hasn't been seen or heard from since, but her blue Honda Jazz was spotted on Tuesday night on Kingston Road in Logan Central. It is now the focal point of the investigation. Police believe it holds the key to finding Wendy, and they are desperately seeking assistance from the public to track it down. Detectives say it will likely have had its number plates removed, making it easily recognisable. Anyone who sees it is urged to contact Crime Stoppers.
Northern Territory Police have arrested one of the country's most wanted fugitives. Mark Ward was arrested on a yacht by the Joint Organised Crime Task Force as the vessel attempted to sail from Cullen Bay Marina in Darwin. Australian Border Force members found a 32-year-old hiding in the hull when they boarded. Mr. Ward has been the subject of a nationwide manhunt since he fled New South Wales in October last year. He'll face an extradition hearing in Darwin on Monday. The Northern Territory's Chief Minister says new alcohol restrictions imposed on Alice Springs won't be extended through the rest of the territory. This week, Natasha Files announced Alice Springs would see immediate new alcohol restrictions, including reduced bottle shop trading hours and purchase limits. But despite crime hitting hard in other towns, she says the restrictions have been tailored just to the Alice Springs community. As Files says there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and any further changes would need to be considered by consultation. Ukrainian forces are set to receive a boost in firepower, with Germany and the US agreeing to supply modern land tanks. Ukraine has hailed the decision as a turning point, which may help deter an expected Russian spring offensive.
These soldiers are fighting a 21st century war with Soviet-era tanks. They're struggling to hold back Russia's front in the Donetsk region and are desperate for Western weapons.
We need more equipment, we need more weapons.
Kiev asked its allies for 300 modern battle tanks. The US has vowed to send 31 of these M1 Abrams, enough for one battalion. But there's concern the vehicles will be difficult for Ukrainians to run.
Abrams tanks are the most capable of tanks in the world. They're also extremely complex to operate and maintain. So we're also giving Ukraine the parts and equipment necessary to effectively sustain these tanks on the battlefield.
Alongside American armored vehicles, more support is coming from Germany. After weeks of pressure, Berlin has agreed to send 14 of its Leopard 2 tanks, considered one of the best for warfare in Ukraine.
It gives its crew a degree of survivability that the Russian tanks can't even come close to.
But in Germany, there was reluctance to send offensive weaponry. Some still feeling the weight of history as an aggressor in two world wars.
The time's in the effort funds. Trust me, trust the German government. Since we are coordinating efforts on an international level, we will continue to ensure that this support is possible without the risks for our country.
Germany's decision paves the way for other European countries to send their Leopard 2 tanks onto Ukraine. Already, leaders here in the UK have promised to send a squadron of Challenger 2 tanks to be on the ground in the coming months. Kremlin officials have labelled the tank supply as provocation by the West.
There's no offensive threat to Russia.
It will be months before any more tanks are on the battlefront. Until then, Ukrainians will have to use what they have. Isabel Higgins, ABC News.
The coldest winter in more than a decade is causing deaths and havoc across Asia, cancelling flights and travel plans. Record snowfall and blizzards in parts of Japan have brought traffic and trains to a standstill, with authorities urging people to stay home. The Arctic winds have seen temperatures in China drop to as low as minus 53 degrees. The cold snap has already killed more than 120 people in Afghanistan, with some regions completely cut off by snow. Many aid groups have suspended operations in recent weeks due to the Taliban's rule banning female workers.
If you can't help us rescind the ban, give us the exemptions to allow women to operate. I was in one of the Taliban ministries yesterday, specifically talking about the need for nutrition, what we call water, sanitation and nutrition, where women's work is particularly vital to the success of the operation. So the winter is a worry. It's not the only worry. And I think the next few weeks are absolutely crucial.
The North Korean capital Pyongyang has reportedly entered a 5-day lockdown. Authorities have made no mention of COVID-19, instead citing rising cases of respiratory illness. We're joined now from Seoul by Jong-Min Kim, lead correspondent of NK News. Thank you very much for your time. What have you learned about the situation in Pyongyang?
So far, this is the first time that we are seeing a lockdown in the capital since North Korea said they allegedly eradicated COVID-19 5 months ago, and that was after North Korea faulting South Korea in May for allegedly bringing in COVID-19 in April through anti-regime leaflets. So this is the first lockdown that we're seeing, but it's unclear if this is countrywide or if this is just Pyongyang. But the foreign ministry protocol that were sent to diplomats, it shows that it was just in Pyongyang for now, 5 days, but if the situation gets worse, it also knows that the lockdown period could be extended 3 more days.
Is it known how well prepared the population is in the capital to face a mass outbreak of COVID, if that is indeed what we're talking about?
Well, what we saw in May last year for 90 days is that North Korea is definitely capable of a solid lockdown when it comes to controlling movements within the country, but when it comes to readiness, when it comes to health, public health situation, with the border lockdown going on as well, the country lacks the capacity for treating seriously ill patients if this is COVID-19. But so far, we're not seeing evidence, hard evidence that this is indeed COVID-19, although there was one Free Asia report citing anonymous source that there was a COVID infection in Pyongyang. And this is kind of similar to what happened in last year when they were citing an infection and an outbreak in Pyongyang right after a mass gathering in the capital marking their anniversary. And that was the time they did a military parade, and another one is coming up. So if there's another mass gathering and it becomes a super spreader, it will be very difficult for North Korea to handle it.
Given the rising COVID case numbers in neighbouring China, is it altogether unexpected that Pyongyang, North Korea, will be facing a public health emergency of this kind?
Well, China, when it comes to China, the strict border area restriction when it comes to COVID-19 regulation that China was conducting last year, it may have helped North Korea to further strengthen the lockdown situation inside North Korea as well. But then recently there were some regulations lifting, so if there are COVID cases near the border area, it could influence North Korea. But again, there's a very strict lockdown going on even for smugglers that's usually coming in from China to North Korea. So the China situation won't be impacting North Korea all that much.
You mentioned the major military parade, which is scheduled for early February. Even if there are increasing cases of a respiratory illness, COVID or something else at that time, would the leader of North Korea want that military parade to go ahead regardless?
I think that will be the case. Even if the respiratory disease situation is still there by the time it hits February 8th, which is the likely date for the military parade, which is also the country's big anniversary, the military parade or any sort of parade involving military assets of soldiers, it will be very important for the country, especially right now, because starting the year, North Korean leader said that the North Korea tactical nuclear weapons unit are now aimed at South Korea, and they were boasting of many different new assets that they were developing or newly deploying. So it will be important for the North Korean leader to also show the domestic public that North Korea is ready despite all the sanctions and the global health crisis.
Really interesting to speak to you, Jong-min Kim, lead correspondent of NK News, joining us live on the song. It is possible humans can understand gestures used by chimpanzees to communicate with each other. Scientists have got volunteers to watch videos and then translate the animals' gestures. The results indicate that this form of communication may be the origin of our verbal communication.
Grooming builds bonds of friendship.
Our closest living relatives, social, intelligent primates that communicate without speaking. And it seems that we humans can tune into this silent gesturing language. Researchers who spent years observing great apes closely in the wild have recorded a whole gesture dictionary, dozens of signals, expressions, and movements that chimps and bonobos use to communicate. By showing videos of these gestures to volunteers, scientists discovered that more than half the time, people are able to understand the message that a wild chimp or bonobo is trying to convey. Here's how a chimpanzee says, "Groom me, please." And this is a bonobo silently demanding food from a companion. Some gestures are easier for us to understand than others. This display is apparently flirtation. But the fact that we can derive meaning from these gestures suggests that they provided a foundation for our own language.
Our last common ancestors with bonobos and chimpanzees probably used quite similar gestures, and that these gestures may have then gone to scaffold the evolution of human gesture and human language as we know it now.
Gorillas, orangutans, and other great apes also use some of these same signals. It's something that people who work with these primates tune into every day.
Gesture is so important to great apes. All of the little ways they need to regulate their social interactions in these amazingly complex social worlds they live in. It's the sort of communicative grease that gets all of that working.
These gestures and our ability to interpret them, the researchers say, sends a scientific message about how our own language evolved.
An Iranian chess player who defected to Spain after she competed without a hijab has met the Spanish Prime Minister in Madrid. Sarah Kadam had taken part in the championship held in Kazakhstan in late December without a hijab, resulting in a warning from Iran telling her not to return to her country. The Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has tweeted he's learned a lot from a woman who inspires him. He's added he supports all women athletes and her example contributes to a better world. I'm going to show you some live pictures now from New Delhi in India, where that country is also celebrating its National Day. This is its Republic Day with a grand parade demonstrating its military might and national culture. The day marks the anniversary of the country's democratic constitution taking force in 1950. The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is attending as the guest of honor. An auction for 5 franchises in the first ever Women's Cricket Premier League in India has seen winning bids pay more than $800 million. That is more than was paid for the inaugural men's IPL franchises back in 2008. In February, further records are expected to be set when bidding starts for the world's best players. Australia is set to feature prominently. The tickets Tracy Holmes.
Seems like every week out of India comes a new record for women's sport, and so Viacom were the successful bidders for the TV rights, and that's for a 5-year period. The first 5 years of this Women's Premier League, which will be called the WPL. So from 23 to 27, they paid $170 million, which works out at about $1.25 million per match. The entire competition is going to be played in March, so it's only a 1-month comp. With these 5 teams that you've spoken about, each team will have up to 7 overseas-based players per year, or per competition, and a $2 million salary cap. So big news for women's sport.
And are the teams the same as we see in the men's IPL?
3 of the teams will be the same. So we've got the Mumbai Indians, the Delhi Capitals, the Royal Challengers, and Bangalore. And then there's 2 other teams. One of them is owned by Capri Global Holdings. That'll be based in Lucknow. The other one is going to be based in Ahmedabad. And that is owned by Adani Sports Line, which is part of the greater Adani Group. That name is familiar here in Australia, as we know, with mining interests. Gautam Adani is the 4th richest man in the world. Until yesterday, he was the 3rd richest. He's slipped back just 1 position, but still has a lot of money. And he's not new to sport either. He's got this sort of subset of businesses that look at sport right around the world. This is his latest interest. But the assistant editor of ESPN Print Info has more on the whole Adani sports interests.
They have a sports line called Adani Sports Line. They own a T20 team in the UAE based T20 league that is going on right now. That is called the Belgian Giants. And they spend more money than anybody else on Wednesday to buy a women's franchise. Nearly 1,280 or 90 crore rupees. And their team is going to be based out of Kerala or Gujarat Giants. They also own boxing teams, football team, and a comedy team as well. So it's not the first time they know how to run sports teams.
So Tracy, what does this tell us about business in sport?
Well, I think what's interesting, if you just look at that particular franchise from the Adani Group, they paid $223 million just to have the license. So we're seeing women's sport really escalating. We're seeing that it's still a massive area of growth in world sport globally, particularly when it comes to cricket in India. And we probably see India at the apex now. One of the things to look out for is that when the Olympics rolls around in Brisbane 2032, cricket most probably will be an Olympic sport. And, with the growth of the women's game and 1.4 billion people there, it's something that is an opportunity that is just going to keep escalating.
Tracy Holmes there. Now, we're a group of boys from outback New South Wales who went on to become trailblazers in Indigenous hip hop music. A group of boys known as the Vulcanium. The group drew global attention for the song Down River. 20 years on, it's time to look at the Vulcanium's legacy and the future for other young people in the outback.
The Vulcanium's recognition at the 2003 Dudley Awards was a moment to remember.
First of all, we'd like to thank everyone who supported us and voted for us.
Band manager Brendan Adams came to Vulcania as part of a community outreach program to give vulnerable youth opportunities.
Previously,
in remote communities throughout Australia was very high. And they wanted us to bring some positive programs to Kenya.
Corpoy Johnson is among two of the group's 5 original members still living in Kenya. Noticed by English rapper MIA, Kenya mobs spread their RPG culture across the globe. Hip Hop Workshop on Google has helped discover the group and says their music has had a lasting impact.
That opened ears and minds to possibilities of like, wow, we can take hip hop and we can use hip hop to tell our stories.
Being part of the new Kenya mob was an incredible opportunity for them as a group. The local kids growing up here today might not always be able to realise their potential.
The moment you focus and invest, that's the word you invest in young people, you will build them to be the leaders.
Keep pushing them. Like I said, season 1, it seems there's more to come for young people in this outlet community. Yusuf Saudi, ABC News, Kenya.
You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. Rallies have drawn tens of thousands of people across the country in protest of the National Holiday. Crowds in Sydney heard speeches before setting off on a march which closed several blocks in the CBD. Elsewhere, protests have been held under the theme Treaty for Full Voice. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has led some of the country's newest citizens in making their pledge at the national ceremony in Canberra. People have gathered across Australia to mark the national holiday, with events ranging from ferry races to celebrations of Indigenous culture. Man charged over the disappearance of his mother on the Gold Coast has been denied bail. 61-year-old Wendy Sleeman disappeared from her Eleanor home on Tuesday afternoon. Her son, 30-year-old Slade Murdoch, is charged with multiple offences, including unlawful stalking, burglary, and kidnapping. And a 3-metre-long crocodile has been caught after being spotted wandering the streets of a town in WA's north. The freshwater crocodile was spotted in the Kimberley town of Fitzroy Crossing at around 2 o'clock this morning. Police officers and local rangers were eventually able to wrangle the reptile back into the Fitzroy River. Hundreds of people from all walks of life are being celebrated for their years of devoted service to the wider community in the Australian Day months. Among them are 354 women, or 48% of all recipients, the most in the history of the awards. One of the highest honours has been bestowed upon Archie Roach, who died last year.
This song is right, this song is true. Singer-songwriter Archie Roach has been posthumously awarded Companion of the Order of Australia. It acknowledges his dedication to performing arts, Indigenous rights and reconciliation. Archie Roach is also being celebrated for his support of emerging First Nations artists over a career that spanned 40 years.
We talked about these sorts of things, and I remember him saying, you know, it's actually not about the person that's being awarded, it's about the community. I think he would have been really chuffed.
Actor Claudia Carlin also acknowledged for her celebrated career, which began in the 1980s with films, before she went on to become a star of the small screen.
We have an incredible talent pool here in Australia. Some people overseas, but then a lot of them come back, and so our industry just gets richer and more knowledgeable.
Philip Noyce has been honoured for his work as a film director, including the groundbreaking rabbit-proof fence in 2002.
I never thought I'd get paid to make movies, and yet 54 years later, I haven't done anything else.
Prolific Melbourne writer Robert Mann has been honoured for his service to tertiary education, political and social commentary, and to the Indigenous community.
And a very controversial life, and so the recognition that I've contributed something to the country I care about deeply matters to me a lot.
Among those recognised for their outstanding work in the Indigenous community is Katrina Fanning from Canberra, who Wiradjuri played for the Australian Delaroos for 14 years and continues to lead in the fields of education and health.
It does come on Australia Day, so it has some mixed feelings, but for me it's about reflecting on our past and then forgetting where I've come from and the people that came before me, but also looking to the future and what's possible for us.
Denise Smith-Ali from Western Australia is dedicated to documenting her native Noongar language. The linguist says Australia is losing languages at one of the highest rates in the world.
It's been a hard ride, but it's been the most beautiful job I've ever had in my life, and enhancing my language and culture.
David Paulson from Sydney has helped in the fight to find a cure for HIV and educating others about the virus. In 1984, he became one of the first people in Australia to learn he was HIV positive, but refused to give up hope.
So I made a decision within probably 30 seconds of diagnosis that I would do everything to help medical science know more about HIV and try and find or help find a treatment or cure.
Freda Lal has been celebrated for his work within Victoria's African communities. A member of Melbourne's Nigerian community, he co-founded the city's annual African Music and Cultural Festival.
The African Australians are excelling in all walks of life. They're not being seen as much. And so this honour actually means a lot.
In Queensland, Robin Edwards' work in suicide prevention has been acknowledged. 2 years after the death of her brother in 2008, she founded the organisation, Roses in the Ocean.
Back then the word suicide wasn't talked about, and it was really clear that the people who actually experienced suicide really weren't being heard.
Barbara and David Rubendijk have fostered more than 400 children in their rural home on the outskirts of Cobargo in New South Wales, work they continued even after losing their home in the 2019 bushfires.
I suppose we get a lot of enjoyment out of it. People say, oh, it's so good for kids. But I think that it's been really, really good for me.
The recipients or family members will receive their awards in ceremonies around the country in coming months. James Wakeman, ABC News.
We're taking you live to Queensland now, or I beg your pardon, to a news conference after the Northern Territory Police arrested one of the country's most wanted fugitives. Let's listen in.
Police, partners in Australian Federal Police, Australian Border Force, Australian Crime Intelligence Commission, and some others who are called in from time to time. And our job is to target organised crime-related activities, not only in the Northern Territory, but that affect the Northern Territory. So we come before you as the senior representatives of the job. Just before we go on, none of you are live streaming, but what I will say is if you ask questions about intelligence or methodology, I'm going to be deliberately vague. I'll just alert you to that before we kick off. So as you know, yesterday afternoon, a 32-year-old man was arrested.
We are going to leave that there. We will bring you an update on that story shortly. He is one of Australia's most recognisable stars of the stage and screen, playing a leading role in everything from quintessential Australian films to Hollywood blockbusters. Today, David Burnham has been honoured for his contribution to the arts. He told me about the thrill of being recognised alongside ordinary Australians who have done extraordinary things. Congratulations to you. What does this honour mean to you?
Honestly, initially I was rather surprised. I received an email in my inbox. Luckily I didn't delete it because it was a curious email that looked as though it should have been in the spam box. So when I opened it up and read the email, my initial reaction was I was surprised. And then reading it again, I've got to say I was quietly chuffed.
How does the creative community tell the story of Australia? And do you believe it does it well?
I think it's impossible to do it on a macro scale, so you have to do it little bit by little bit. All those little small piecemeal of chunks will paint a lovely tapestry of what Australia is and who we are as Australians. Something like 23-24% of our population are born overseas. So a quarter of our population, they come with differences that we should celebrate. We should Australia Day, we should celebrate our commonalities, but we also should take the opportunity to celebrate the differences within our community, because that's the sort of thing that makes us truly unique.
On a day like this, what does it mean to you to be Australian?
I feel thrilled to be recognised within quite a large group of people who have also been honoured. I happen to have a public profile. Most of the people who've been honoured today don't, but they have done extraordinary things within their own community. They're the people who make this place what we are. They're the people who make this country so rich.
And you can see that full interview with James Wenham on the ABC iView. Residents of Alice Springs have used today's Invasion Day protest to discuss some of the issues facing First Nations people in the city in a week marked by the visit of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Lee Robinson has more from Alice Springs.
There were more than 250 people today who turned out to the Alice Springs Invasion Day rally held on Aranda country. The organisers of the event, which included the Stronger Grandmothers group, used the event as an opportunity to discuss some of the issues facing First Nations people in the town. Now, at the centre, discussions of sovereignty, self-determination, and also talking about the spiralling rates of domestic and family violence being experienced in the community. It comes days after the Prime Minister made a flying visit to the town, resulting in a raft of new alcohol bans being put in place to help stem the high rates of crime and antisocial behaviour currently being experienced. Now, here's some of what the attendees had to say.
We've had a serious crime situation in our city lately that's been out of control. Okay, the government's not looking, the government's not supporting us properly, and people are shops having to close early, and we want the town back to normality. We want respect. We want change.
The kids that walk around the street, they need to go home on country. Where they come from. And the information, give this to their parents.
In this situation now, in order to make a change, you people in Alice, you need to come together with us.
The discussion also pivoted to the upcoming referendum on the voice, and there was also strong support to see additional funding put into support services and programs that will help address some of the root causes of the issues being experienced. Now, local matters were also front and centre today, with a lot of talk about a statue in town of explorer John McDouall Stewart, who can be seen holding a rifle, and that call for that statue to either be altered or removed. They say it serves as a painful reminder of the often violent history of the relationships between settlers and First Nations people.
And as we just heard, the upcoming referendum on an Indigenous voice to Parliament has loomed large at today's protest marches. The voice would enshrine an independent representative advisory body for First Nations people in the Constitution. The bill is set to be introduced to Parliament for scrutiny in March, with a vote expected by the second half of the year. The Prime Minister says voting yes will be a great step towards reconciliation.
I'd say to people who are contemplating what their response will be to what has been put forward. Can you imagine next year the counterfactual? Either we will have a constitution on Australia Day that recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as our first peoples in this country. That will be an act of reconciliation. Or, if the referendum is not successful, I think people know that that will not be a moment that shows respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. That, I think, doesn't show the maturity of us as a nation, non-Indigenous Australia, who we are, acknowledging the fullness and richness of our history, but also the way that we're perceived by the world as well.
The federal opposition has been calling for more detail on the voice to Parliament. Opposition leader Peter Dutton says Australians need to make an informed decision at the referendum.
The Prime Minister doesn't understand or hasn't decided on the detail yet, so how can Australians make a decision when they're properly informed? And as you move around the community, it's quite obvious that people don't understand what it is that the Prime Minister's talking about. And they understand that changing the Constitution is a big deal, and instinctively, millions of Australians, we want better outcomes for Indigenous Australians. We don't want to see the dreadful circumstances that are the reality in Alice Springs and other parts of the Northern Territory at the moment. So we'll work with the Prime Minister. We've been very clear about that. We've got a parliamentary process to go through, and I think my party, like most Australians, want to see the detail. And the Prime Minister's proposed a significant change to our Constitution, the way the government will operate, the way that laws will be enacted, and it's incumbent on him as the Prime Minister to provide that detail.
Professor Marcia Langton is the co-writer of one of the papers outlining the policy of the Indigenous Voice Co-Design Report. She says there is already plenty of information available on how the Voice 2 Parliament will work.
We have a dilemma. If we release too much information, there are some politicians who will use that information and turn it into disinformation and start an argument about that. If we release too little, and there's mountains of information, but if we distribute too little information to the public, then people will feel that they're being conned. So we have to find the balance. Do you agree that there should be a voice for Indigenous Australians to the Parliament? It's a yes/no question. People say, well, what will a voice look like? After that question is answered, there's the challenge of the Parliament grappling with the detail, drafting a bill, and going through the parliamentary processes, such as sending it out to committees for scrutiny, not only by parliamentarians but by the public. So the detail will be resolved in the parliamentary process, and that's the Australian parliamentary system. That's how our democracy works.
Professor Marcia Langton there. The flood-affected community of Lismore in northern New South Wales is slowly recovering after catastrophic flooding in the last year. What's kept many people going has been the grassroots community support, which is being celebrated today after the whole town's postcode was nominated for Citizen of the Year. Robin Herbert reports from Lismore.
11 months ago, the city of Lismore was underwater, but today it's been about celebrating and recognising those people and community groups who really have pitched in and lended a hand in the flood recovery response. So much so that even the postcode of Lismore, everyone who makes up this community was nominated for the Citizen of the Year award. In the end, it was an individual, Sophia Watt, who set up a kitchen that just catered for so many people who require food in the days, weeks and months after the flood. Thousands of people, adult people, people coming up to 1,400 meals a week. So you can imagine over 11 months, that's tremendous. Attention now turns to the flood anniversary next month and also the ongoing support needed for people to get back into their homes. Across this region, there are still 600 people who are in emergency accommodation. There are hundreds more who are in their homes, but they're in fairly basic and primitive conditions. The Reconstruction Corporation is overseeing the Resilient Homes package. There's still only about 130 people, we understand, who have been given a response in terms of a potential buyback of the like. So it's a slow recovery for the community.
Germany and the US will send tanks to Ukraine in the first stage of a coordinated effort by the US to provide more and more armour to boost Kiev's firepower against Russia. Germany had initially been reluctant to allow its Leopard 2 tanks to be sent to the front line, and the decision marks the first time German tanks will be used on a battlefield in Europe since the Second World War. His former Lieutenant Colonel of the German Army, Professor Sascha Bachmann, is now at the University of Cambridge.
It's a German tradition of pacifism. That means that Germany tries to use diplomacy and trade, for example, to influence international relations and not basically work with the hardcore of, for example, getting involved militarily. Secondly, with Olaf Scholz, there's also a tradition of engaging with what was then the Soviet Union, what is now Russia, and it was changed to trade and diplomacy. It was called the East policy, Ostpolitik, and that is still very much in the mindset. The other thing is there's this big concern that the provision of the Leopard battle tank will be seen as really escalating things, and Russia, as part of its disinformation, is using the nuclear escalation as a very powerful, you can say, disinformation tool. And lastly, there is in the German population overall strong support for supporting Ukraine. However, when it comes to the delivery of the Leopard battle tank, there the numbers are slightly smaller, still a support, but not as heavily as supporting Ukraine in general. So the Leopard tank has a long tradition and was designed to, you can say, counter the tank onslaught by the then Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union. And the particular in question, which is the Leopard 2A6, that goes back to 1979. And what military analysts always stress is it has got this combination. It has speed, it has protection for the crew, it has firepower, it has advanced optics which allow the tank actually to engage with the enemy while traveling, while driving, which is very important. And I just would like to quote a German colleague who is actually director of the German Panzer Museum, the Tank Museum, and he's an expert. He used this comparison of a boxing match. The Leopard is basically Muhammad Ali, that is not what I made up, and then basically the opponent is a heavy boxer, a heavyweight boxer. So the Russian tanks are much slower, they don't have the same optics, and the protection for the crew is much inferior. Hence, the German Leopard tank is really the right choice.
We're going to take you now back to New Delhi in India. We're getting some terrific live images. The country is celebrating a national day also today on January 6th. It is Republic Day there. Celebrations are taking place with a grand parade demonstrating the country's military might and national culture. The day marks the anniversary of the country's democratic constitution, which took force in 1950. Back home in Kimberley, locals have spent a sleepless night trying to catch a large crocodile that emerged from floodwaters and been found roaming the streets of Fitzroy Crossing. The 3-metre animal was found by a resident in the early hours of the morning. Police officers, Shire Rangers and Aboriginal Rangers used whatever equipment they had to try to wrangle the reptile. At one point, a police officer threw a towel over the animal's head to try to subdue it. The crocodile has been returned to the flooded Fitzroy River. No crops in Melbourne, where Catherine Murphy is standing by for us, but she does have news of a developing story. Footage has emerged of Novak Djokovic's father with Russian tennis fans brandishing the country's banned flag at Melbourne Park. Cat, this is big news. Bring us the latest.
It is indeed. Hello to you, Kirsten. As you said, footage which appears to be Novak Djokovic's father with Russian tennis fans who had been displaying flags both at the match and afterwards in the precinct around Melbourne Park. Now, we knew that already because police had detained several fans with Russian flags, but the footage that has emerged is, or appears to be, of Novak Djokovic's father with those fans. Now, it's really important for us to point out that we don't know the circumstances of this footage, how it came about. We don't know what was involved in this situation, and we're making inquiries about that. We also don't know if Novak Djokovic's father has any relationship with these people, if he's ever met them before. We're making inquiries about the circumstances. It's also really important to point out that Novak Djokovic has been really vocal in his support, particularly for former Ukrainian tennis players who are now fighting on the front line in Ukraine. In fact, he even offered to financially support one of those Ukrainian players. That player released text messages where Novak Djokovic had pledged his financial support to that player. Well, after today's developing news and that footage emerged, tennis Australia has released a statement, Kirsten. They're saying a small group of people displayed inappropriate flags and symbols and even threatened security guards. Following last night's match, they were evicted. One patron is still assisting police with these matters. Players and their teams have been briefed and reminded of event policy regarding flags and symbols, and they've been told, Kirsten, to avoid any situation that has the potential to disrupt the tournament. And I will just reiterate that we do not know the circumstances around this situation. We're still making inquiries, and no doubt there will be more to come on this story.
Kat, thanks for giving us all the background to that. Let's now talk about the tennis and the build-up to the women's semi-final night is well and truly on. First up, it is the battle of the Grand Slam champions. Who are you expecting, Morgan?
Well, it's a beautiful evening for tennis, Kirsten. It couldn't be more perfect here in Melbourne, and people are flowing into Melbourne Park. First up, as you said, Battle of the Grand Slam champions. I'm expecting, and you are too, because we agreed on this, that Jelena Rybakina will go through. But she has taken on Victoria Azarenka, who has won this tournament twice, Kirsten, and we cannot believe what we have seen from Victoria Azarenka. For anyone who doesn't know her story, she has had a really tough few years. She had a baby, she tried to come back and play on the tour, which isn't easy in itself, but she also had a custody battle to contend with. So she has not had it easy. The fact that she is back in the final four of a Grand Slam event is a story in itself. And although I say Rybakina, you wouldn't back against her because she must be such a strong person to come through everything she has and make it to here. And I know you're looking for my tip in the other semi-final, right?
Absolutely, don't hold back.
I love that you're putting me in the spot because I've been putting you on the spot all week. In the other semi-final, it's a really good one as well. Magdalena and Arina Sabalenka, such great stories. Magdalena, 30 years old, through to the final four of a Grand Slam, and she had never been past the third round. Despite that story, I'm going to back Arina Sabalenka to win that one.
Now, the one thing I think we can agree on is that there has been some fabulous tennis, so it does look like we're in for another really great night. But we should now move on to the men's. There are no special Ks at the Open this year, but an Aussie duo is attempting for the slot in the men's doubles final to make it back-to-back titles for Australia.
Well, you talked to me at a very good time because just minutes ago, the Aussie duo of Jason Kubler and Rinky Hijikata have booked their spot in the final of the men's doubles here at the Australian Open, and they did it convincingly, Kirsten. 6-4, 6-2. This is over the 8 seeds, but you know what? That's no problem for them, Kirsten, because they'd already chirped out the number 1 seeds on their way to the semi-final. They are through to the final. They were unseeded, of course. They were wild cards. Now, not as wild card as the special Ks, I think you'll agree. They are such good guys. They also had really impressive singles campaigns. They both made it to the second round, but they lost to players who were still in the draw. So Rinky lost to Stefanos Tsitsipas. We know how well he's going. Jason Kubler lost to Karen Khachanov. We know he's in the final four. So they had great singles campaigns to make it through to the second round, but now they're bidding to make it back-to-back titles for Australia in the men's doubles. So even though we're without Ash Barty, even though we're without Nick Kyrgios in the special case, we have that new doubles pairing to cheer for. We just need a good nickname for them, Kirsten. So any suggestions, send them through.
Thank you very much for finishing on the good news. That is Kat Murphy. We will talk to you again soon. A quick reminder to you, you can keep up to date, of course, on all the latest news across all your devices at news.abc.net.au or ABC iView. We'll see.
January 26th, the ABC gives you the best seats in the house for Australia Day Live to honour
the country and celebrate the Australian spirit. Fireworks and maritime show on the harbour, with performances from some of our biggest stars: Casey Donovan, Dummy Ian, Christine Anu, William Barton, Isaiah Firebrace, and lots more. A concert for the country you won't want to miss. Australia Day Live, tonight on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView. For the day's big stories, they're the team that won't miss a beat. We have next dark chapters. It's about First Nations people from the world. Women have been speaking up.
For having this discussion now, we have the opportunity here to make our voices heard.
The Drum, weeknights at 6 on ABC and ABC iView. From ancient cloud forests
The forests are almost entirely unchanged since the dinosaurs existed.
to a wild, arid desert,
It's a special thing to say that they're cool and
putting together the pieces of the ecological puzzle.
these creatures have all got a part to play.
This is a truly remarkable legacy that the people of Australia are the custodians of.
Australia's Wild Odyssey, Tuesday 8:30 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Alright, let's get off there, the boss. Celebrate your career with the ABC. ABC is the only place to see Sydney on right now. That's a bit fabulous. Just like us.
Today, new citizens pledge their allegiance as the country marks Australia Day. Calls for Australia Day to be abolished at rallies across the country. One of the country's most wanted fugitives arrested in the Northern Territory. And Tennis Australia issues a warning after visual images of Novak Djokovic's father with pro-Russian supporters. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Kirsten Regan. Australia Day is being marked in many different ways as people gather at events across the country. The sales of the Sydney Opera House were illuminated and adorned with artwork by Broadway artist Walter Sampson. A traditional smoking ceremony marked the start of events in many towns and cities. Canberra's national flag raising and citizenship ceremony has seen a number of new citizens taking the pledge of the Prime Minister. Emma Thompson reports from Canberra.
I'm on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin, where earlier this morning there was around 1,000 people who gathered for the national flag raising and citizenship ceremony here in Canberra. Among those attendees was the Prime Minister and the Governor General. To start off the ceremony, we had Indigenous singer Alinta Barlow, who sang with the children's choir for our national anthem. She actually repeated that first verse in Ngunnawal language. We've had 6 flags being raised down here, 2 of which are Aboriginal and 2 are Torres Strait Islander. There's a 21-gun salute and a flyover by the Royal Australian Air Force drew a big crowd down here to mark Australia Day. We've had 23 people from 9 countries who've taken the pledge with the Prime Minister to become new Australian citizens. They've come from all walks of life. We've had a family from Egypt, where the parents are qualified pharmacists, an American couple who are award-winning astronomers, a Brazilian man who arrived here on Christmas Eve of 2005 when he was just 13 years old, and a woman from Iran who's using today to lobby for women's rights. Here's what a few of them have had to say.
Very exciting.
Great.
Splendid. This means that we can, fully enjoy and, have involvement in the community here, which is very important.
It should be all about citizens. And we can vote, we can have the vote opinion, and it's loving it.
The festivities will now turn to more community-based events, which will kick off around Canberra later today.
And in Canberra, more than 800 people have marched from the city centre to the Aboriginal Tent Embassy to mark the day. They heard speeches from Ngunnawal people about the issues still affecting their community. Here's reports.
Citizens marched through Canberra city centre today. They walked 2.5 kilometres in 31-degree heat with a series of loud and passionate messages. The group started the day gathering in Marina Place and listening to speeches from local Ngunnawal people as well as speeches from Aboriginal elders from other states. They talked about the horrors that Indigenous people face after invasion through the racism they still face today.
As a country, we're still at government engagement addressing high incarceration rates, high youth suicide, living in poverty, still considered as second and third class citizens.
Enough is enough! We're sick of burying our kids! We're sick of burying our people at young ages! Look at the statistics! Look at the criminal rates! Shame!
There also calls for an end to deaths in custody of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There was a passionate debate about the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Several people spoke against it. One organiser said this not reflect Indigenous people's sovereignty and that they're being offered crumbs. We also talked to a lot of people who took part in the marches, and they universally said they do not support the current date of Australia Day. They said they look forward to in the future where the date is changed so that all Australians can celebrate our national day. There was also a call from a lot of non-Indigenous people to the greater public when they consider the debate about our national day. They try to consider the views of Indigenous people.
Hundreds of people have gathered in Perth CBD for an Australia Day protest. Speakers at the event have been calling for people to oppose the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament. David Webber has been.
It's a very warm day here today, especially here at Forest Place, the city. It's taken on a bit of a festive atmosphere in the last 10 minutes or so. First thing I played the song Treaty. Now there's another song going on behind me. Hopefully you can still hear me. But earlier on, speakers really did focus on the importance of treaty as opposed to the voice. They spoke against the voice. They said there hadn't been enough consultation with grassroots Indigenous people. Spoke out against the Uluru Statement of Heart. And in fact, one speaker went back to the native title negotiations in the 1990s, saying mining companies went to the mining companies had gone to land councils and sorted out deals without speaking to what he referred to as the lakeside of Aboriginal politics. So those speakers that are actually saying that the voice should be ignored, in fact, people should be voting no and checking the referendum as a whole. That's coming from the segment of what we're doing today in terms of the Australia Day protest, which we're going to as well as illustrate today. But I mean, all of Aboriginal people, of course, in this Australia, this world voice, it's going to be a debate that's ongoing, obviously. But today, really, that anti-voice message is really coming through a really pro-treaty voice, quoting likes of Michael Manson and so on, and really having to go on the whole process. Back to you, Chris.
David Webber there in Perth. One final question. How long is that protest expected to last, and are other events planned in the coming?
Well, this is the main one for Aboriginal people in terms of opposing Australia Day. It's likely that this will end with a march around the city and then moving likely end. It is a hot day. It probably has kept numbers down as well as it being a public holiday. Probably more than 1,000 people here at the moment.
Australia Day celebrations are underway in Northern Territory with the annual Youth Run. It'll see hundreds of youths travel across Darwin to raise money and support children with disability.
Well, here in Darwin, as you can probably see, there's plenty of youths. They're all about to take part in the annual Australia Day Youth Run, which is raising money for a variety of activities. A local charity supports children living with disabilities in the territory. They're hoping to raise about 15 grand. But amongst all the good work, there's also some very Australian things. Up into my old mate here, Paul. You're running a barbecue off the back of the ute. Barbecue off the back of the ute.
Are you any more Australian than that old Aussie built car? Lamb chops on the barbecue on Australia Day morning.
And so, how many times have you been doing the ute run?
This is the third run we're running this time, like third year round. We get up at about 3:30, leave the rural area. We're out the gates by 4:30.
And I've got to ask, how do you get a barbecue working on the back of the ute?
Well, as long as you're not trying to cook and drive at the same time, that's pretty easy. We get up here as soon as we're on the grid, start the coals up, about half an hour later, lamb chops are on.
That was the secret to a perfect lamb chop.
Get barbie nice and hot. As soon as those coals are really burning and the grill's warm, chop straight on, really hot. A couple of minutes later, turning, and then straight off, soak them in tomato sauce and mint jelly. Can't beat it.
Now, I think you might be able to answer this question in advance. A lot of people, Australia Day, a bit about it for them is, celebrating things to them that are Australian. Is there any kind of Aussie slang or phrases that you really like?
Well, we started with the t-shirts that we're wearing. You little ripper. How much more Aussie than that does it get?
Yeah, just finally, why get up early in the morning and drive a ute about 30 odd k's out to Noonanbah?
It's all part of the whole day, the whole community coming together. Everyone in Australia put their own interests. Us down here are car enthusiasts, so we like to bring the two together. We love our cars and we love our country, and let's bring it all together and celebrate all at once.
Well, certainly, you can smell the diesel here. It won't just be all taking off. They'll all be heading on about a 30-kilometre convoy from this raceway here out to the Noonanbah pub, where they'll be enjoying some more festivities across January 26.
Ferries are taken to Sydney Harbour in one of Australia Day's oldest and most storied traditions. The iconic Flynn Harbour ferries went stern to stern in a battle of knots and nuance in the annual boat race. From a tight pack of competitors, the Catherine Hamlin Dundee to claim this year's awards. A man charged over the disappearance of his mother on Gold Coast has been denied bail. 61-year-old Wendy Sleeman has been missing from her Ellenborough home since Tuesday afternoon. Reporter Mackenzie Colohan has the story.
Slade Murdoch was refused bail in a Brisbane court this morning following his arrest late yesterday. Specialist tactical officers raided a home in Durack in Brisbane's southwestern suburbs and found him at about 5 p.m. He's now in custody. We understand he is exercising his right to silence and refusing to cooperate with the police investigation. He is charged with a list of serious offences including kidnapping, stalking, burglary, assault occasioning bodily harm, attempted arson and unlawful use of a motor vehicle. Yesterday afternoon, police divers recovered a knife as well as equipment from Wendy's home security system that had been removed and dumped in the lake behind her Ellenborough home. Today, a large contingent of forensic investigators remain at the scene, combing through the property looking for clues. Detectives provided an update on the investigation this morning, confirming what many feared, that it is now transitioning from a missing persons case to a suspected homicide investigation. They also confirmed new details about how close they came to finding her, revealing that when officers arrived at her home on Tuesday afternoon, her son Slade was allegedly still in the driveway behind the wheel of her blue Honda Jazz. Investigators believe she was in the car.
I can say that the vehicle went at speed and that we were unable to intercept that. I mean, it's an operational decision at the time. I'm confident this decision was made. Every minute counts at this particular point. If she's still alive, she needs help there.
Wendy hasn't been seen or heard from since, but her blue Honda Jazz was spotted on Tuesday night on Kingston Road in Logan Central. It is now the focal point of the investigation. Police believe it holds the key to finding Wendy, and they are desperately seeking assistance from the public to track it down. Detectives say it will likely have had its number plates removed, making it easily recognisable. Anyone who sees it is urged to contact Crime Stoppers.
Northern Territory Police have arrested one of the country's most wanted fugitives. Mark Hall was arrested on a yacht by the Joint Organised Crime Task Force as the vessel attempted to sail from Cullen Bay Marina in Darwin. Australian Border Force members found the 32-year-old hiding in the hull when they boarded. Mr. Horn has been the subject of a nationwide manhunt since he fled New South Wales in October last year. Territory Police say they were shocked at the lengths he had gone to escape.
We had a fairly good idea that there was an man on the vessel. We weren't particularly sure where on the vessel, but with our Border Force and Australian Federal Police colleagues, we searched the vessel and found him in a fairly unusual. It was a very, very small space. Most of us would have fitted in, but somehow he managed to squeeze in.
The Northern Territory's Chief Minister says new alcohol restrictions imposed on Alice Springs won't be extended through the rest of the territory. This week, Natasha Files announced Alice Springs would see immediate new alcohol restrictions, including reduced bottle shop trading hours and purchase limits. But despite crime hitting hard in other towns, she says the restrictions have been taken just to the Alice Springs community. Ms. Mark says there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and any further changes would need to be considered by consultation. Overseas, and Ukrainian forces are set to receive a boost in firepower from Germany and the US agreeing to supply modern battle tanks. Ukraine has hailed the decision as a turning point, which may help deter an expected Russian spring offensive.
These soldiers are fighting a 21st century war with Soviet-era tanks. They're struggling to hold back Russia's front in the Donetsk region and are desperate for Western weapons. Kiev asked its allies for 300 modern battle tanks. The US has vowed to send 31 of these, M1 Abrams, enough for one battalion. But there's concern the vehicles will be difficult for Ukrainians to run.
Abrams tanks are the most capable tanks in the world. They're also extremely complex to operate and maintain. So we're also giving Ukraine the parts and equipment necessary to effectively sustain these tanks on the battlefield.
Alongside American armored vehicles, more support is coming from Germany. Groups of pressure
Yeah, and it's so hard. Especially when she's such a good girl.
Oh shit.
You just sit on the couch, buddy, and then I'll give you a